our 21st weekly Zoom session where we talk about this, that, and the other, and all calling related, and have a variety of discussions. Generally, each is a new topic. This one is sort of a continuation of last week. Not quite, but sort of. We had a great discussion last week. Our 1 hour session sort of went 3 hours, but that's for the diehards that wanted to stick around and have their voices heard also. We had a discussion mostly aimed at newer callers giving a chance to express the kind of training they've had or the kind of training they wish they'd had. And as Dan said, some of the 5-year callers know some terminology that's secondhand and that they forgot they didn't know 5 years before, and we're trying to find out some of that stuff. There was a lot talked about caller schools, caller coaches, accredited caller coaches, and I thought this week, let me say just a little about that, and then introduce our panel. A coach is almost a misnomer. It's a coach, it's a teacher, it's a mentor. It's somebody who helps somebody else in their calling skills. An accredited caller coach is many, many years ago, when shortly after CALLERLAB got started, and I'm sure somebody will correct me if necessary on some of the more details, CALLERLAB decided to accredit callers. And as I recall, the accreditation process, because it would sound good if you were an accredited caller, the accreditation process was not much more than signing your name to a piece of paper or having somebody else type it in. A few years later, some of the coaches that had been teaching people decided we should accredit caller coaches in order to have a credential that shows more of the, gives people that want to learn to call maybe a little better handle on who's experienced enough to really be able to help them. And realizing that the caller accreditation was so easy, they made the caller coach accreditation much, much more difficult. And the process of becoming a caller, and again, as I mentioned last week, CALLERLAB is not a caller school. CALLERLAB is a professional organization of those of us that are in the profession, either full-time or as a part-time hobby kind of thing. And all are welcome and encouraged to join us in making decisions. We're just people trying to get things together and come up with a consensus of what's best for the activity. But the process of becoming an accredited caller coach right now is, and this is a very rough thing, but initially after applying, you have to take a written test to show that you have basic knowledge of calling skills. And that's passing grade is pretty high. There are 110 questions that you take, chosen randomly from a batch of 300 or 400 or 500. I don't know how many are on the list right now. And you have to get 100 of those right, 100 out of the 110. That's a pretty high score. To get that, you go on to writing an essay. And I believe the Caller Coach Committee gives you a topic to write on. It's been a while since I went through that, so I can't totally remember. Say that.
Please, Don.
5
essay questions.
5 essay questions. Okay, that's even better. And after that, you have to go through a, what do you call it? A verbal interview. You've got to talk to 2 active caller coaches who interview you. What's the word I'm looking for? It's not an interview.
Oral review.
Oral review.
Oral review. Thank you, John. And they have to evaluate your techniques, not only knowledge as a caller, but their impressions of whether they think you can pass that on to others. And a lot of that's based on your essay questions and the answers there. It's a rigorous process, and it's only good for a certain number of years, and then you have to reaccredit, and then reaccredit a number of years later.
5.
Is 5 years? I went through that once. I went reaccredited once, and then foolishly didn't follow the paperwork through to reaccredit a third time. But we have with us a panel of 4 accredited caller coaches. One of those goes back to the original founding of this thing and can fill in a lot of the background if wanted. We have 1, 2, did Steve Turner join us? I can't remember.
Yeah.
There's Steve, thank you. At least 3 currently accredited callers that are sitting in watching, and I'm sure we'll get in on the question and answers if needed. We have many other caller coaches.
I think I count 5, Don.
Oh. Hi, Rick. How are you?
Good.
And plus myself, who once I lost accreditation, totally lost all the knowledge I ever had.
5.5.
We have caller coaches. There are currently 29 accredited caller coaches around the world. They're in 5 different countries. Oh, by the way, one of the other things required to become a caller coach is at least 50 hours of coaching of some sort, be it one-on-one mentoring or sitting in as an assistant at one of the schools run by an accredited caller coach, etc. Anyway, I want to introduce the panel, and the discussion today hopefully will be a good interchange of information and questions for the panel, their additional comments on what might be necessary, or the value of being a caller coach. Brian, you've moved your camera. We only see your forehead. As those of you that have attended our sessions before, you know it's fairly informal, and I tend to get distracted by foreheads. I noticed, by the way, we're up to 43 attendants. We've been averaging 25 to 30. The only time we've gone way over 30 was like up to 50 is when Deborah presented for us. And it must be you, Deborah, that brings them in, because we're well over that number now. Anyway, without further rambling, I want to introduce our panel. From Texas, Jon Jones. From Texas, someplace in the same part of Texas, his wife, but also an accredited caller coach, Deborah Carroll-Jones. From New Jersey, Betsy Gotta. And from Pennsylvania and Alabama, I see by your putting your thing up there, Tom Miller. And with that, why don't one of the panel guys take it away, and we'll go from there. Do I have to pick a name? Come on, speak up, guys.
I'm drinking my coffee.
Oh.
Well, I don't mind starting. Since I'm the only active caller coach that was in on the original setup and panel, and we formed a committee to draft up procedures for caller coach accreditation. And it went on for quite some time. We had names like Earl Johnson, Al Brundage, Jack Lazary, Cal Golden, Frank Lane, Bob Van Antwerp, Lee Helsel, Bill Peters, Dave Taylor. And if you can't think of a whole lot of discussion going on among these people, it was unbelievable. I wish we had had tapes of all the discussions that we had. but it was quite interesting and very educational. And it was set out in the very beginning that it was not to be an easy process, a simple process. It's not unattainable as some people think it might be, but it is very rigid and very strict, and we stick to the guns, and an individual has to pass not only the written test, as Don was saying, but also the oral review. And also, when anyone applies for caller coach accreditation, that name is sent out to all of the other accredited caller coaches to see if there is anything that would prohibit that individual from going any further. And I'm glad to say at the present time, we've never had that happen as yet.
John, what kind of stuff might that be?
What was your question, Rick?
What kind of stuff might that be to preclude someone?
Something possibly with unethical that they had done to somebody.
Yeah, it would have to be something in that type of category, or if there was something that, you know, if they had bad debts, or if they had all kinds of things that were going on that were not, or was felt that were not proper within our activity, then it could be a question situation.
So there's no real laid down set of things, just common sense.
No,
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
And the Board of Governors chose 3 people from 3 different sections of the United States to go through the original process. And on the East Coast, it was Earl Johnson, Al Brundage, and Jack Lazary. On the West Coast, it was Bob Van Antwerp, Lee Helsel, and Bill Peters. Here in the central part, it was Frank Lane, Cal Golden, and myself. And I was chairman of the Board of CALLERLAB at the time it was taking place. And in my chairman's speech in Orlando in 1980, I stated that this was in the process of happening, and I named these callers that I just got through naming. And I told everybody that Frank Lane, Cal Golden, and I spent 3 days in a motel in Mobile, Alabama, examining each other.
Very good. Is there video?
And
Of course not.
So John, when did the caller coaching thing come in then at that point?
Boo.
we had 2 witnesses. Cal's wife and Frank's wife were sitting in there watching us anyway. So anyway,
As chaperones.
that's what we went through. But those of us 9 callers had to pass the test with something over 300 questions in it. And then we eventually decided to reduce it down to 110 questions, and an applicant has to pass 100 of those questions. And then you have to go through, write the essays that you're assigned to. We have a list of about 10 different subjects, and the person in charge of doing that at the present time, and has been for the last several years, is Ken Ratusic. And he grades the written test, and he also assigns the essay subjects and reviews them when they come back in. And then the answers to those essay questions are submitted to the oral review caller coaches that are assigned to review the applicant. And then if they pass the oral review, then they become an accredited caller coach. And we recently have had 2, Bill Harrison and Ted Lizotte, recently at Dottie Welch, not too far away. And it's good to have these, and it's good for anybody that wants to be a caller coach and get your accreditation to go through the process. We have a curriculum guideline that was adopted back in 1986. And we also have attached to that a technical supplement that covers every subject that we have involved in our activity. And it's a lengthy process, but it's also very worthwhile. And you have to have, within the 5 years of your accreditation, you have to conduct so many hours of caller training to qualify for reaccreditation. And that's what callers have to be aware of and make sure that they get done. Rick?
Yeah, John, I'm just curious. I didn't hear any mention of any of the board of reviews or anybody. Do we actually listen to the potential caller coaches? Do we listen to them and subjectively, if nothing else, see if they're any good?
You mean as a caller?
Oh, yeah. I mean, both. You know, when the caller coach candidate, we'll put them that way.
The caller coach candidate, for one thing, has to be a CALLERLAB accredited caller. Now, Don was talking about that and saying that it was pretty easy because all you had to do was sign a piece of paper, but actually there's more than one signature to be gotten. And if I got Steve Avery to sign my accreditation that he had heard me and said I was a reasonably good caller and could do the stuff that I can do or say I can do, and I cannot sign for Steve, period. And
no, I understand that.
No, but some other people might not.
Gotcha. But no, I just, there's no actual formal listening panel at this point?
No, because we carry the CALLERLAB accreditation, which should have taken care of that.
Like you said, it's only a signature.
We have not had any caller apply for accreditation that somebody on the panel does not know personally and can verify one way or the other whether they're a good caller or not.
Okay.
And so even those that are in overseas countries like Steve Turner and Edeltraud Haas and Martin Paul Bristow over in England, there's somebody on the caller coach panel that would know everybody that has applied, or somebody would know them. And that's the reason that name goes out to everybody on the caller coach list for any information in that regard. And it has been a really great experience. And we had some really good people involved. Jim Mayo was one of our originals also. And he's been involved in caller coaching all these years. And it's really great. We encourage anybody that's a teacher of callers to really look at the program and see if you don't want to become an accredited caller coach.
And there's a mini test that you can take if you're thinking about, maybe I'd like to become a caller coach, but I don't know what it entails or if I have the right knowledge. There's a mini test of 25 questions that you can take. And it's graded by the person that's in charge of all that right now. It happens to be Ken Ratuzzi. And that lets you know if there's holes in your learning. And all of the questions that are on the test and all of the questions that are asked by the oral reviewers are in the technical supplement and the curriculum guidelines. So if you get both of those publications and study them, everything that you will be tested on and everything you really need underneath you as far as your knowledge base is in there.
I just want to throw in a quick, sorry, Terry. I just wanted to throw in a quick thing about, John, when you were saying when the original guys really tried not to be a good old boy network and take the tests themselves. They did not write all the tests themselves, so they knew all the answers, all the questions. they farmed the questions out to a number of different people that had expertise in different areas, so that there were questions in there that were not ones just written by them. And I happen to know this because I wrote a few of the questions when asked to.
And I want to point out one other thing that we haven't said is, in addition to meeting all the other specifications that they have given you to become a CALLERLAB accredited caller coach and to reaccredit, you have to keep an active calling schedule.
Right. Now, I was going to say one other thing before I pass on, Don, that
Could you rephrase that?
or pass out or whatever. Just listen to what I'm saying, Don.
I did.
Clapping her hands saying, yay. I listened to the program last week, Don, and some of the comments that were made were very viable comments and rather surprising to me. But in listening to the situation, it appeared to me that the coaches that were making some of these remarks are not fulfilling their responsibility, were not accredited caller coaches, but rather other caller coaches. Now, and in saying some of the things that we have as far as acronyms and that type of thing, I heard it mentioned that they didn't know what a corner box was. They didn't know what a zero box was. They didn't know what a phaser was. Incidentally, phaser is an acronym for formation, arrangement, sequence, and relationship. And it's pronounced phaser and not phaser, as I have heard some people say. We adopted it as phaser in the very beginning. Now, and the box 1-4 and the zero box, the zero line and that type of thing has all been changed. And it goes through the caller training committee, of which Betsy Gotta is the chairman of that committee. And back in May of 2017, it was adopted and published, and it went to everybody in CALLERLAB as a press release. And if you want to look it up, I Googled on the computer, CALLERLAB phaser formation naming. And it came up. I've got the piece of paper right here that shows exactly what it is, and it renamed everything. A zero box is now called a corner box. A zero line is now called a partner line. And we have a whole list of these things that have all been changed. So if you don't have it, you should get it and learn what is on there. Okay? I passed, Don.
I'm waiting to hear from Daryl. Daryl's been waiting.
Yeah, I'm not really good at jumping into conversations. John, I think probably you're the only caller coach, at least here today, that has been accredited longer than myself. I think I was probably in the one of the first ones after it was established to go through the testing and everything. Bill Peters sold me on the idea because he knew that I was teaching college schools at that time. And the way he told me was that they wanted to have a group of caller coaches that were proven good enough that somebody in New South Wales, Australia could feel confident about hiring them and paying the expenses of flying them over and putting on a school. Now that was the idea behind it as far as I can recall. The caller accreditation itself, just for history, I do believe came after the accreditation of callers. I think the caller coach, no, I'm wrong? Okay.
I don't think so.
Yeah, that's not all that important anyway. It was just something that went through my mind as we went through this. But we've gone through different things in this accreditation program just to make it better and make it more dependable. Rick asked about how we kept undesirables out. We did go for a while there that we didn't have this question go out ahead of time before testing started to make sure that we were getting good people. And we did have probably more than one incident where we wish we had had that, so the change was made. So we do take a good look at whoever's applying for the accreditation before they start the testing. If you're a good teacher, if you're a good caller, if you've been teaching caller schools, I would suggest go ahead and take the test. If nothing else, you're going to find out some places where maybe you need to improve in your presentations for the people that you're trying to teach. Thank you very much.
Comment if I can make, if you're thinking about going in for the accreditation, I think one of the things you should look at first is maybe mentor somebody. Get into somebody in the area that you know is trying to call, and if you've been calling for a while, step up to the plate and try to mentor them. It's not in all parts of the country that we have an accredited caller coach. There's some areas that we don't have an accredited caller coach that you can turn to ask them to mentor. So step up and become a mentor, and that's really going to help you proceed with your accreditation if you choose to go that route. Listen, I'm the new kid here in the block as far as the accreditation. I think mine was 8 years ago, I guess. And with me doing the seminars and the caller schools, I'm doing one-on-one coaching on Zoom sessions, as some of you are on here are taking that course with me and so forth. I take pride in what I do when I do my seminars and teaching and so forth. I like to get this on the track to where we were last week with some of the questions that the newbies had, to where they weren't happy with the schools. The caller coaches weren't giving them the time, or they didn't know the terminology prior to school and things like that. So it was interesting to hear. It kind of hit hard because I heard comments like nobody gave us any direction what to do after a caller school. And I'm thinking to myself, that could not have been an accredited caller coach, because each and every one of us, I think I can speak for all of those caller coaches, accredited caller coaches on here, that we tell them that your education continues after the caller school is over. I like to see the accredited caller coaches nod their head yes, that I'm correct with that, because we do tell them that they can contact us anytime that they see fit, or any questions after the school is done. And I feel that each and every one of the accredited caller coaches, they're not standoffish. You have a question, they'll, at any given time, you walk up to them and ask them a question, they'll give you an answer. And if you ask all 29 of the accredited caller coaches the same question, you're pretty much going to get the same answer. It may not be in the same format or the same text or different arrangement, but you're going to get a pretty high percentage of the same answer from all the accredited caller coaches, because we all work off of that CALLERLAB Accredited Caller Coach curriculum book. That's our Bible. That's what we go by. So the concerns of some of the newbie callers that they weren't getting this and getting that before going into a caller school. Rick, you're noticed, okay? So you don't have to keep holding your finger up, okay? Looks like it's going to go off. But anyway, it's something that we heard it, and now we need to listen of things that we can do to better our caller schools, to better us as accredited caller coaches. Listen, there ain't one of us that's perfect, and we're always apt to learning new stuff, regardless of how long we've been calling. And I can speak for everybody that's accredited caller coach. When we stop learning, that's when we quit calling. But we need to know, and the only way that we need to know, if you come up and ask us questions or voice your concerns prior to.
Rick?
I can't speak as an accredited caller coach because I'm not. I do teach callers clinics and caller seminars. I do not teach caller schools. For the time I also belonged to ACA, I was a certified caller training specialist. One of the biggest things that I see in my little weekend things, and I kind of got wind of this from last weekend's one, I wanted to jump in, speaking particularly to the coaches. The people coming up, for whatever reason, don't seem to have a real good understanding of terminology, some of the stuff that we might take for granted. And I know that the last one that I did, which was in Santa Ana, California, last November, I think it was November. Anyway, everybody in there was like, could you please tell us what the hell a chicken plucker is? What the heck a partner line is? Denise is smiling because she and I have had this same conversation. But it's easy to throw out terms, gang, but remember, you have little idea how much prep work these folks have done. And you get somebody like Katie down there. She's been busting butt at learning how to do this forever. She'd probably do very well in a caller school, whereas someone that's more shy or more isolated, and you know, they get in there and they hear these terms and they don't know what they mean, and it's only me, and they just kind of sink down into nothingness. I just wanted to make you guys aware that I have heard this from many a student of mine.
Right. And it's something that a caller coach needs to be aware of and make certain that everybody understands what they're talking about.
May I address a topic that happened last week also? It was a woman caller who said that they had gone to the school. They were asked to call before anything happened. And then based solely on that, they were put into the groups that they were with during the caller school. And I'd like to clarify a little bit of what we're doing when we do that. First of all, when you submit your application to the caller school, you put down how often you have been calling, and that it's sorted by that to begin with. All of those names, I can only speak for myself and how I run a school. Those students and their information are then sent out to the rest of the staff. If they have any further information about those students, if they've mentored them, if they've been to one of their schools, they put that into the pot. Then the night that you get up and you actually call, we are looking for, and you shouldn't be put on the spot. That should be given to you way ahead of time. And when you're getting up there and you're calling, there are a ton of things that we are evaluating as you're standing up there. I'm watching everything from posture, breathing, mic placement, control of the choreography, pitch, your comfort on stage, your rapport or connection with the dancers. I'm looking at a plethora of different things. And then after all that information is gathered, the entire staff meets again, and we talk about what our impressions were of that student while they were behind the microphone. And based on that, then we make our decisions as to where to place people. The placement is fluid in that if we've made a misjudgment or the student says, I understand all of this and I really would like to be in the next group, that can be discussed and adjusted at that point in time. And Betsy has had her hand up, so I will hush.
It's part of my exercise program.
Betsy, before you jump in, I want to comment that Betsy is the only one of the panel we haven't heard from, and we're going to hear from her in a moment. I was going to ask you to talk anyway. And after that, I want, a lot of this is because last week, I mean, we presented pretty good who and what and why accreditation of caller coaches and such. Last week, Dan led off the discussion on the transition from newbies and all these acronyms. I went to a class once where the instructors said, beware of the TLAs, and then he kept talking. And eventually somebody said, what's a TLA? And he said, 3-letter acronyms. Rick, you were talking about not using them, and then you talked about ACA. And I'll bet you 2/3 of the people don't know what ACA is, but it happens to be American Callers Association an organization similar to CALLERLAB. But I'm going to want to.
It's so easy. It's so easy because we use these terms in our everyday life. It's so easy to chuck them out there and not even realize.
I'll use the other arm for a while.
But so after Betsy talks, I want to start hearing from some of the people that were talking last week, some of the newer callers. You've got a great panel here and others to ask questions of. And so we've spent, you know, half the time laying the background, but we also want to hear the other side and have a good discussion between newbies and not. Betsy, go for it.
Okay, I'm going to give you a whole lot of information because I may never get the mic again. First thing, for all the new callers, there is a starter kit for new callers put out by CallerLab. Revised date is May of 2013. And my feeling after listening to last week was that every one of us, and I have been guilty of this too, every caller coach who's doing anything should advise the applicants for a caller school to buy the starter kit for newer callers. We've had them at the school, but what was brought home last week was they need to have them in advance because there's a preamble and then how to use this kit, and then there's a whole bunch of formations, and then they get to terminology. And the terminology page, which starts on 17 here, has a lot of the terms that people were tossing about that we didn't use, or that we use and they didn't know. And if you had a chance to read them in advance, you might have a better chance of keeping up. Dan, what were you going to say?
So I was just going to note that I searched on CallerLab new caller while you were talking. And the first document is a document for mentors suggesting that new callers buy the new caller kit. Nowhere on the first page of results is anywhere indicating where a new caller can buy the new caller kit. So
I would check the.
Well,
there's a list of sale products.
Yeah, well, one of the things that CallerLab might be able to do is to put a page that gets a lot of Google juice, or that is obviously on the front page. If you are a new caller, click here and send us $25.
Sadly,
obvious.
Sadly, the CallerLab website is terribly difficult to navigate. It just is. I know some of you have worked on the thing and you're proud of it, but the fact of the matter is it's damn hard to find a specific topic on the thing.
And what I'm trying to say is that if you apply to a caller school, it is incumbent upon the caller coaches for that school to advise the applicants of where to go and how to buy it. Period. End of sentence. And that would help them navigate the CallerLab website.
It wouldn't.
John, go ahead.
Yes, it would if I told them exactly where to go and how to click on it, because I am one of the least technological people in this earth.
Yeah, that would be true if you were saying, I want you to go get this particular document. What I was saying was
and that's what I am telling them to do, is to go get this particular document called the Starter Kit for Newer Callers.
Awesome.
Starter Kit for Newer Callers.
I assume that you guys are taking little notes, like for improving the accredited caller program, and that one of those is going to be about what Betsy is suggesting, that and what she's saying right now for everybody and for the coaches is something that ought to be in the coach material itself before they get their stamp of approval. In their little kit of information, one of the things should be, some kind of a checklist that makes sure that the things that you guys are talking about actually happen.
Don?
Go ahead, John.
Here in my area, or in the entire state of Texas, as far as that's concerned, if I find out there's somebody that wants to learn how to be a caller, I give them the address and the name of CallerLab and tell them how much the book costs, and I tell them that's the first thing you've got to do is you got to buy the new caller starter kit, period. Then you go from there. And if other callers are not doing that, then they should. make certain that that new caller has the information that they need to begin with before they ever even think about going to a caller school.
I was, I guess, unaware or had forgotten about this booklet. After last week's session, I was thinking, gee, I should write a booklet like this. People need this stuff. Then talking to Tom Miller, he
Yeah.
said he and another coach have started thinking about it. Betsy has made us greatly aware that this is already available. Now we just got to publicize it more. Betsy, what's up?
Well, Janet, my hand. Janet put in the chat that she had the application for the caller school she attended, and all it asked for was name, address, etc. Name, spouse, address, email, phone, and deposit amount. But when I get one of those registration forms, when I was teaching caller school, and Tom Miller and I shared a caller school for a while, when I do that registration form, then I send out to somebody a questionnaire. Then on that questionnaire says name, well, I don't even ask for the spouse when you're registering. I don't even care. But I ask for name and experience. Have you ever called? Blah, blah, blah. And all of that information is gotten in the second contact, not in the registration.
As I was saying, after hearing Betsy, we should start listening to some of the comments of the newer callers and have specific questions from them. And I don't read the chat very often, but I see Mike Callahan is suggesting we get to that too.
Yep.
So how about some people we haven't heard from before?
May I just say one thing, just as the last thing? While we were doing this, I Googled Caller Starter Kit at the CallerLab website and got information that was things like spoof card, privacy first call blocking, starter kits at Amazon, and then finally a press release for starter kits for newer callers. It's not top of the page in our own search box.
If you want a copy of it, I've posted that press release in the chat.
That's not the point.
No, I understand that.
That's all I wanted.
That helps for some here posting it, Mel, but we're talking in general others. So that's a start. And
If somebody wants to learn how to call and they're not near a caller coach, they have one resource, and that's if they can figure out CallerLab. But let's assume they figure out CallerLab and they go search on that website. It's not very user-friendly.
The assignment for all 44 of you is to copy that link and send it to your 10 best friends. John has a comment. Go ahead, John.
When I was still chairman of the board, and my last chairman speech was in 1981 in Kansas City, Missouri, and this very subject came up about that if you're a new caller in an area that doesn't have anybody for you to study under or to be your mentor, move. Just one of those things. The new caller's got to hunt this stuff. He's got to look for it. He's got to do everything that a new caller can do to be a caller. It doesn't just come to you automatically. You have to.
No, but we can't make it harder for them, John. And we do.
Dan, you want to give us the almost new caller perspective that you started this interesting conversation with last week?
Well, so my point was not actually about, well, where I thought I was coming from last week was not about the caller teaching process. It was about the mental structures that new callers have that, or don't have, that experienced callers do, that make conversations happen on a completely different level. And I didn't mean to make it about caller schools, except that I think that one of the things that I ran into, even talking with experienced caller coaches, until this clicked to me, and the school that I've gone to with Betsy was over that hump. Okay, so the specific example was, I think the best example was a few years after my first caller school, A bunch of us newer callers were in Toronto at the IAGSTC convention. We let ourselves into a hall after hours because we hadn't heard each other call, and we were calling to each other. And one of the callers who had gone to every GCA caller school since the first one I went to, and that one, so that was, she'd been to like 4 or 5 caller schools. She was standing up calling, and it was just, okay, yeah, just run us through a chicken plucker, show us your rhythm, show all of that. And I pointed out that the chicken plucker was the same as centers partner trade centers pass through, and it blew her mind. So I think that's the kind of impedance mismatch I was talking about, where she'd been to several 4 or 5 caller schools with 4 or 5 accredited caller coaches, and had not had the opportunity to build that simple mental structure of what occurs in a chicken plucker. So that's where I was going. I wasn't wanting to make it a full on press against the caller coaches and caller accreditation process. I've gotten some pretty good stuff out of caller coaches. I've gotten some pretty good stuff out of non-accredited callers. That was that impedance mismatch thing. Anyway.
So we asked Denise or Phil something.
Regard, Dan, the chicken plucker is the name of the entire routine.
Yeah.
Way back in the days when I first started learning to call, everything was memorized, and every module or routine had a name. And the author who put that out named it the chicken plucker, and so we have kept that name. It's the name of the entire routine, not just a piece of it.
Well, colloquially, new callers, at least in my experience, refer to the process of taking the center dancers across, or the right and left through pass through trade by, as half a chicken. So that's the terminology among the circle of my peers.
And we asked Denise.
In all actuality, gang, chicken plucker had dive through pass through. Didn't have a pass through trade by.
It also works as a relay the deucey. Who cares? Let's talk to Denise or somebody that has a question.
Well, I'm going to jump in here if that's okay, just so that you know where I stand. I've been calling for 3 years, so I'm a new caller. I've been to 5 caller schools. 4 of them are accredited. 1 was not accredited. And I'm just going to kind of relay my experience that I have gone through. And I am thankful for all the schools that I've gone to. I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but this was the experience that I had and how I felt and what I came away with information-wise or feeling-wise to move forward. My very first caller school that I went to, filled out the little application on the back of the pamphlet. It literally asked for name, address, spouse name, email address, phone number. That was it. And I hadn't heard anything. I picked up the phone and called the number that was on the brochure, and I said, I know nothing. I need to know what I need to have learned by the time this school happens. And they told me nothing. And I thought, okay, great. That's exactly what I know. I don't have a mic. I don't have any music. I don't have a laptop, and nothing. And so I went knowing nothing. But during that phone conversation, he had said, but if you could have a singing call prepared. And I'm like, I just sat here and told you I don't have a music, I don't have mic, I don't have anything. And so I contacted the next caller that attended and called our dance and said, I'm supposed to have this singing call ready. And it was like 3 months away. And so he helped me walk through a singing call. I was not prepared to do it at all by the time the school rolled around, but I had it. And I did it that first night at the caller school. And then that night they said, now for your singing call tomorrow night. And I'm going, what? And so it was very nerve-wracking, to say the least. They had given us a card to memorize with all the magic modules and everything on it. Chicken plucker, that's the first time I'd ever heard of any of those. Memorized all those. I spent my dinner time memorizing all those. And at 4 o'clock that second day, it was time to go to dinner and prepare for your singing call for that night. Well, I hadn't had one lined up or anything. One of the callers had offered to help me with it, and it just did not go well. I ended up leaving for dinner saying, just kind of throwing my hands up, and I'm like, I'll do the best I can. I don't have any idea what I'm doing. It actually went okay that night. That experience at that school was an emotional roller coaster. I went from extreme highs to extreme lows, and it was within, hours, because one time you're learning how to move dancers around, and the next thing you're paranoid because you don't have a singing call for that night. You don't know how to put one together or anything like that. So that was quite an experience at that school. The one thing that really stuck with me, there was one accredited caller coach that during that singing call that first night, they knew I was nervous. They knew I'd never done it before. They knew they were asking a lot, but they stood right behind me off to the side. And as I'm trying to sing this, all they did was say, slow down, slow down. Because when you get nervous, you tend to speed up. And so just that fact that they sat there and told me, just whispered nice and soft to me, just slow down, it helped me tremendously slow down and kind of rethink through as I was doing the singing call for the dance that night. So that was extremely beneficial. 5 months later, I went to my second school, and it was a big difference because the first school had 4 students and 4 caller coaches. The second one was at Nationals, and there were 52 callers in that caller school. It was overwhelming. I think we got on the mic once a day. I walked away with more information than I could possibly use, more information than what sunk in. I really thought, oh, okay, that was not good. I met a lot of people, but I didn't really take away a lot from that particular school. I liked the caller coaches. They had a lot of good ideas. I walked away with a lot of good information, but I couldn't necessarily apply it at that time. Looking back on it now, it's great information, and I do use it because I took good notes at all the schools. 4 months later, I went to my third caller school, and that was a wonderful caller school. I was in a great group. It was the one where you got up on stage, you did your little singing call. By that time, I'd had 7 months of experience. I could put together a singing call and perform it fairly well. Learned a lot from that caller school, but it was still overwhelming. There's more information there, and you are asked to do things that you're not quite ready for. You get really nervous on stage. I understand that some of that is just learning to get over those nerves and everything. But I learned at corner box. So through all this time, the first 2, it was at the second school I was introduced to a corner box. The first school I was never introduced to a corner box. They talked about partner lines a lot. The next school I went to, it was, those 3 schools were all the week-long schools. Then I went to a not accredited caller school, and it was every week for like 3 or 4 months. And that was beneficial. It was not accredited, but I learned how to deal with all the distractions because they created a lot of distractions as we were up there on the mic trying to learn to call. So that was just extremely beneficial because they says, this is going to happen at a dance. You're going to have people getting up, moving around, people talking. You're going to have those distractions. You have to learn how to deal with them. And then I went to another school that had met a month. It was once a month, all day on a Saturday. And that was great because we could take the information that we had learned and actually practice it and apply it. And that was an accredited caller school. And then we'd come back the following month, and it'd be an all-day Saturday, and we'd learn more stuff, and we'd be able to go home and practice that. And so I think the time that we had in between to practice and apply this stuff, I was able to grasp the concepts better. And I love teaching. That's one of the things that I would look forward to doing is teaching new dancers. And so the fact that I can wrap my head around a concept and get a good base before I move on to something else when I don't have a good grasp of, the first concepts that I'm trying to learn, I think it was more helpful and more better for me to be able to take some information, practice it, take some information, practice it. Where at the week-long caller schools, it was learn, 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 learn. And by the time you get to the end of the week, you've forgotten half of what you learned. So if you didn't either record the sessions or take good notes, you're walking away with a manual. And I've been to Ken Ratucci's caller school, and I'll tell you what, that manual that you get is worth your weight in gold, because I have so many times read through that manual, referred back to that manual, and it was tremendously helpful in having that manual as a reference book to refer back to, because then I went to a different caller school, learned something else, and I went back to his book and looked where I may have missed it at the school that he taught. And it's a great reference manual just to have on hand.
Janet, a lot of good points, but let's give someone a chance to respond to that. Deborah, are you?
Well,
go for it.
Janet, it's not really good that you had to go through all of this experience from being a brand new caller, not knowing anything, to go into a caller school. Yet it's going to be so far over your head, it's going to be unbelievable, and it would be for anybody else. We always tell every caller that we know is new that they must know at least 2 singing calls before they come to our caller school. That way they've got just a little bit of experience, but listening to what you have said, and over the years that look at all the knowledge you have gathered that you can pass on to other new callers.
You know,
Yeah,
just to make it,
and one of the things at the one caller school, I felt I was in the wrong group, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to say anything. I'm just going to stay here, and I'm going to figure out why I'm here. What can I get out of this whole session? And during that time, there were people who were newer than I was that I understood what they were talking about, but they didn't. And so even at that time, I think it had been 2.5 years that I was calling, I was able to realize that I had information I could pass on to them, simple things, and it made a world of difference in their time there at the school. And so that made me feel good, because I was able to help them. And so maybe I was there literally I walked away with information too, but I was able to help somebody else while I was there too. So that made me feel good.
Yeah, that's very great. I'd like to say, hey, Brian Hoskins, you need to wake up. And hey, we ought to hear from Steve Turner and Walt Burr. I see them on there. Y'all haven't said a word. What's going on in Australia, Steve?
In the chat, Mel points out that Tom Miller and Katie Wilson have been trying to chime in. Let's give Tom and Katie a chance.
Let's give Denise a chance as well.
Okay, just a comment to Janet's her comment and her concerns and so forth. You know, it's like what you've gone through coming to the school without any kind of knowledge, and then you're overwhelmed with everything that you get within that short period of time. Think what we do to our new dancers, the people that come to the square dance the very first night that don't have any idea what you're talking about square dancing, and we expect them to start dancing without even a piece of paper, without even any concerns. You're going to start moving when I tell you what's the call going to be. You know, so think about that when you start teaching your new dancers. Number 2, I've been to a lot of seminars over my 48 years of calling, not just with calling, but with other topics and so forth with my personal life and things. And those seminars are overwhelming. And that's why you're given handouts that you can take home after the fact to study them and learn to what those topics or that topic was all about. The same way when you get a syllabus at a caller school, there's no way you can learn everything in that syllabus in a short period of time of the 3 or 4 days, or even a weekend seminar. That's for your reference to take it home and practice or look at it to what's inside that syllabus book. When we get people to come to the school, last week, let me back up a little bit. Last week, someone made a comment that it's more of a lecturing than it is color coaching. I think that is so far from the truth. We have to present the topic. But I know for a fact that I can speak for me, and I work with Deborah at schools, I work with Betsy with schools, I worked at school with Mike Callahan. They'll tell you that we stand up there beside people to make them successful. We're coaching them to get to where they need to be to get into a comfort zone. Is that a distraction? It might be, but at the same token, if we didn't stand there and coach, what avenue would you be taking? Probably the wrong one. So we kind of keep you in line in the direction that you need to go when it comes to that coaching. Sure, there's discussion, a lecture on the topic, but at the end of the day, let me tell you, when I stand on my feet all day long and I get back to my room at night, I'm exhausted because I'm there beside the students. I'm only a hand throw away that I can voice my opinion to what direction they need to take. Just my thoughts.
We've had, I think I mentioned this last time, that there's a dilemma when you're teaching this school. You've only got so many hours. You're trying to get through the entire CALLERLAB curriculum, but you're also trying to do individual coaching and listening. And it's a dilemma on how to squeeze those in, and different people work it differently. Let's hear from Katie Wilson, because you had your hand up quite a while ago, and then Terry, you're next.
Thank you. Well, the one thing that I want to mention first off is that feeling when they're learning, in the fact that if we overwhelm and we upset too many people, they're just going to quit. They're not going to keep trying to learn. Most people are not like John is to go, well, that was a rough experience, but I'm going to keep going. A lot of people are just going to walk away and give up. You know, so we really need to think about the experience as a whole, you know, and
So one of the things I wanted to mention was that at the GCA Caller School, we do a little thing at the end of it. Bill Eiler puts it on every year. It says, so you think you might want to be a caller. And one of the things that I think would be very beneficial is if you're thinking about calling, maybe you should attend something like that, or maybe there should be a program where you can sit in on a caller school where you're not participating, so you can kind of get a feel of what it is before you get in there and dive headfirst into the waters when you don't know how to swim. There's a lot of information, and having tools makes a big difference. I know that for my, I explain what I like because I've had callers.
I am afraid I have to jump in here because we've been talking for an hour, and we're starting to almost scratch the surface of this, which is great. But after an hour, as advertised, anybody that does feel they have to leave, feel free to not even excuse yourself, just disappear, because, and don't feel guilty like you're offending, like we're going to be offended because you disappear. And if you want to hear the good stuff afterwards, Dan will be posting this video on YouTube. Betsy, I know, has to leave in half an hour, or even before that because of another.
No, I can push you to 45 minutes.
Well, whenever you
just
have
got the GCA dance. It starts at 1 p.m. here.
Whenever you have to leave, just do that. Thank you for attending. Oh, and my usual thank yous to Dan for engineering this. thank you to our panel, Jon Jones, Deborah Carroll-Jones, Tom Miller, and Betsy Gotta for joining us, or for fielding some of these questions and filling us in. My thank you to all 44 of you. I think there are only 42 left. And yeah, subtract one for me. Coming to this and adding to making this interest. Thank you to all the accredited caller coaches who have taken the time to go through this process and making themselves available to help newer callers come on the way on this. Thank you for the newer callers that are helping us, helping the caller coaches, the accredited caller coaches, of understanding maybe a little bit more that first step that we were talking about last time of just what is a TLA, a three-letter acronym, what does it mean? And thank you, Dan, for keeping this open so we can keep going, because I'm sure many of you would like to hang around and continue. It's been a great conversation so far. With that, I'll back out again.
Steve Turner and Ed Crowley, duck in here. I think Steve first.
Okay. The one thing I think of is just like all businesses. You get so close to the business, you're so involved, you have no idea what it looks like to someone else. You know, it's when you call up a business and the person on the other end has no idea how long that phone tree is, because they would never call their own job. They would just walk down the hall and deal with it. So it's very hard as a seasoned caller to even go to a caller school and try to look and say, okay, I don't know any of this. What's being presented to me? Okay. The other thing I find is that if you go to one caller school and then you go to the next one, they want to repeat the exact same CallerLab curriculum, as though there's not CallerLab 101, you know, School 101, then 102 and 103, you know, for those other parts that are not there. Some of the more experienced callers had to learn things on their own that was not taught at any of the schools they attended. I'm pretty sure of all the caller coaches on here today, no one learned about using a computer for calling at calling school.
Wrong.
When you went to in the early days of calling, you learned at a caller school as a student?
No, but I thought you said today that doesn't happen, but it does happen.
I said that the callers, the experienced callers didn't have the computers back when they were going to school as an attendee. Okay.
An underwhelming experience that Dan and myself and a few others had was at CallerLab a few years ago, and we had set it up. We were going to break off from one of the groups, and we were going to break off and show people 2 or 3 different how to use computers. And I think we had an underwhelming 4 people there, Dan?
It wasn't me, because I haven't been to CallerLab yet.
Maybe it was national, but yeah, because somebody was there talking about Square Desk. It wasn't you, who was it?
That was probably Mike Pogue at CallerLab. So yeah, it was
probably
Mike is the other author of Square Desk.
Yeah, but still, what we had was we had 4 or 5 people there, and it was tragic.
But I think that that the point here is that I'll let others continue to talk.
You had to learn it somewhere else along the way. Okay. Now it's part of the business, yet I see it in the handout I'm given, but I have to then read that handout and then try to figure it out on my own at home. We say that people learn differently. Some of us actually need a hands-on. We need to walk through the process of learning something. What I notice is we teach that people learn in different ways, but then when you go to most of the schools, because I haven't been to everybody's, we're taught in a certain manner.
Ed, ask your daughter.
Yes, but we do work together quite often, including the other night when I missed my timing with someone else. And I'm still working on learning that singing call, so I can't go to certain schools yet. So hopefully this year we'll learn with my teacher. Thank you.
Hey, when I was learning the laptop, I'm like Ed, I got to have hands-on. And the first dance I did, I was working with Billy Harrison, and I said, Billy, stay close to the computer. And he said, why? Because I said, you're not going to push buttons for me. So every time I had a pattern, he had to come up and push the button and turn it off. And of course, it was a quick learning process because Billy finally found out that I was dishing on him real bad, that he was controlling my music. And in the middle of a singing call, he come up and hit the space bar, and he goes, "Oh, I thought you were done." So that was kind of the end of using Billy Harrison as a go-to of pushing my keys for me. But Ed, you're right. You are right. I'm not computer savvy, let me tell you. So sometimes those papers, just not with laptop, but any of the topics, sometimes you got to dissect them things apart. Just like when someone writes a book, you know, about mental image, you got to read that book 15, 20,000 times before you understand it. Am I right, Don?
Yeah, in fact, you should be paying me 15,000 times each time you read it.
I know, right?
And buy a new one every 10,000. This last
man.
Caller Lab that didn't happen, I was scheduled, I forget who was else on the panel, but we were scheduled to do a how to get your computer to work panel. And I think that's something that I hope to be involved with at the next one, but if not, I hope that is something that occurs at every single Caller Lab going forward.
Hey, Steve.
So Steve Turner's trying to get us in.
Hello. It's been very interesting listening to all the comments, and unfortunately I wasn't around last week to hear what was going on, but my thoughts are is that really every organisation in the world needs a shake-up every now and then, and if it means a bit of a shake-up for accredited caller coaches to think again and just say, okay, am I really covering everything? Am I able to reach those newer callers? So, you know, these sorts of comments are good for everybody. So I'm sure that all caller coaches will be taking this on board and making sure we are doing the right thing. I guess I'm fairly lucky that I know probably 99.9% of all callers in Australia and New Zealand. We have a slightly different system in Australia where a new caller wants to become a caller, then they get a sponsor caller to start things off. So they normally come from one of their clubs. If they haven't got a sponsor caller, then we encourage them to go and find a sponsor caller somewhere in their area. So they would actually start teaching them the fundamentals, and then eventually they would come to a caller school. And I think probably 90% of our attendees, even with new callers, they've got some idea of what's happening as a caller. So I guess that's beneficial for us. But with these sorts of comments that are coming through tonight, I'm certainly going to take it on board to make sure that I am doing a good job and that I do make sure that I'm sort of looking after the brand new caller. I will say I met Janet that was talking about the experience that she had in caller schools a couple of years ago, and I was very impressed with her knowledge, even though she'd only been calling 4 to 5 years. I will say I wish that this sort of training had been available 50, 60 years ago when I was starting, because I think I would have been a better caller and a quicker caller then it probably took me 20, 30 years to start learning, because there really was nothing around in Australia and it was self-taught. So, you know, I think newer callers nowadays are very, very lucky to have this sort of knowledge and this sort of training to be available. It does take a lot of work. It does take a lot of...
You started, Steve. You were very shaky.
Thank you.
I think Leo's trying to talk.
So yes, it's and boy, you know, in the early days, I mean, we did a lot of study ourselves because we couldn't find anything else. So that made us probably better callers, rather than relying on just other callers teaching us at caller schools. But you know, hang in there. It takes a lot of study. It takes a lot of caller schools to get anywhere. And you know, like I said, everybody needs to shake up, and you know, I'll certainly have a look at myself again. So I think that's about it from me.
Leo, go for it.
We have Howard and Leo wanting to pipe in.
Hi guys. So I hope that boy, I really wish I was here last week. It sounded like a lot of fun. Some of you know my story, some of you don't. I've been calling for about 15 years. So I don't have the experience that a lot of people on this call do, but my observations are this: you know, calling is not sitting in a classroom. Calling is not reading a handout, and it's not you know, it's not reading a book. Sitting in a classroom trying to be a caller is kind of like sitting in a garage trying to make a car. It just doesn't work unless you actually call. You know, some comments that callers around my area have said, and maybe you can have heard something similar, would be something like, give me $300 and you can call my garage anytime that you want. You know, those sorts of things. I think that caller schools need to really evaluate what their main objective is, because quite frankly, you have people that have never been on stage before trying to figure out what 1P, 2P, 0 box corner line is, while they're, you know, trying to keep from peeing their pants being on stage with a microphone in their hand for the first time. So, you know, I really think that things need to be evaluated on what the actual objective of the caller school is. So any feedback that accredited coaches have, I would love to hear.
I want to throw in a couple quickies. One is, Steve, I emailed you a link to last week's session. And then Leo, when you mentioned you were curious about it, I just posted in the chat a link to last week's session on YouTube in case any of you want to go to the background of that. And two, Ed, one thing that you said that I thought was kind of interesting and I've thought about recently is you said that you've been to several caller schools and they all seem to present the same stuff. That's because they're trying to do this curricula thing, but I've been thinking about specialized schools where they pick one topic and they announce beforehand, we are going to work on these one or these two things. And as I've mentioned earlier or before, that Wade Driver is doing this with a specialized school for singing calls, and I'm doing some online stuff for mental image calling, but maybe there should be some additional kind of, you know, you've been to one or two places where you've been fed the fire hose. Now let's look at some of the droplets in here.
That's exactly why I just do seminars on, you know, one or two topics. Don't try to do schools. John had said one thing about the newer callers need to put in some effort. Tell you something about Leo. Leo was in the hospital on Thursday night in San Diego, and he made it to the first session of the weekend caller seminar about 400 miles north.
Wow.
Yeah.
Some of us are crazy. John and
Leo,
Deborah.
Yeah, he's great.
Leo, what were you thinking?
Yeah, it was my seminar. It's not like you missed anything.
That's
Well,
yeah, that's why.
On the way back, my car broke down, and I was stuck in the middle of the valley with a dead car coming back. So,
John and Deborah were trying to get their 2 cents worth in. Go for it, John.
Don, one reason that we teach as much of the entire curriculum as we can as a program at a caller school, because CALLERLAB has a scholarship program. And if a caller coach is not teaching the full curriculum program, it does not qualify for anybody getting a scholarship. And so we have it open where people can apply for a scholarship. But if you're doing nothing but mental image, it would not qualify for anybody getting a scholarship. If you're doing one about nothing but singing calls, it doesn't qualify. But you also have to be an accredited caller coach for anybody to qualify for a scholarship.
One of the things that our organization does here in Orange County, if I can say, is you can also get scholarship money from some other places.
Tom had his hand up, and I think we still haven't heard from Howard.
Just a question. I think we need to go back to Leo's question about the objective of our caller schools. First of all, I have to agree with Leo that outside of the schools and the seminars is where you truly learn how to call. That's where you get your most experience of having the personal mic time by yourself with dancers. Coming to the caller school, I think the objective is, Leo, and the accredited caller coaches, jump in if I may be wrong, but is to give the tools, give the basic, give the fundamentals to what you need to become just not a caller, but a good caller, and understanding everything that needs to be done. Yes, there's a lot of information in a 4-day period, in the 40 hours. I mean, without a doubt. But the objective is to make sure that you guys walk away from that school understanding the premier topics of becoming a square dance caller.
and I would agree with you, Tom. I'll make this real quick. I would agree with you, but you know, the varying experiences that people have. I heard somebody earlier saying that it was just overwhelming. That's not setting people up for success. That is putting them in the fire, in front of the fire hose, and hoping they survive, which is not productive in my opinion. But I'll go back to mute.
Yep, no taken. I'd like to hear Deborah's comment.
Just out of curiosity then, does that mean that the scholarship thing is actually hindering us? It would seem on the surface that it does. If these people, let's say a person applies for a scholarship, and that due to that one person having the scholarship, that particular class has to cover the entire curriculum, which is the same thing perhaps the guy had gone once before. It would seem to me cut the curriculum in half and make half scholarships, or I mean half schools with full scholarships.
Deborah.
There have been adjustments within the scholarship system because of our Women in Calling School that we had, 2 years ago. It did not qualify because it was not a full 40-hour school, and the EC decided that some of the shorter schools should have access to these funds. So that has been adjusted to a certain point. My second point that I would like to bring up is that if you think you're going to go to a school and somehow we're going to stick a funnel in your ear and pour all of the information in there and none of it's going to run out the other side, you are dreaming. This is something that takes time to assimilate. And you are only going to be able to absorb as much as your personal brain, your personal work ethic, and your access to being able to actually call is. And secondly, if you do not belong to a local callers association, start one. Belong to your local callers association and ask the people on the board to consider putting on training sessions that address these subjects that you need a little bit more work or a little bit more help on, and give them some direction in which way to take these training sessions, and you will be able to get a lot more on an ongoing basis than to think you're going to go to a school and get everything you need, which we're trying to fill all the holes and put the information into your hands. But what you do with it after you leave is up to you. And the assistance that your local associations can give you will be absolutely invaluable. If there isn't anything, we had a young caller in this area a while back who just went ahead and got a hall and put out notice and asked dancers to please come so that he could call and have practice. And then another caller came, and another caller came, and the coach showed up, and all of a sudden they had some training sessions. So sometimes you have to take the bull by the horns. If this is something that you want, go get it.
Hey, Mel,
Putting together a college association is an excellent idea, presupposing there's more than one caller in the area.
We've mentioned before that the dancers don't learn all of square dancing the first day they come, or the first 2 or 3 sessions they come. So don't expect callers, which is calling even more difficult than dancing. Don't expect everybody to learn that all as you did. Now, if you listen to the session we did several weeks ago that Barry Johnson told us about how people learn, one of the things was that you get presented it, let it sink in for a while, get presented again, let it sink in for a while. If you do it all at once, it's only going to be in short-term memory and not in long-term memory. I was fortunate enough that my first caller school was with Jim Mayo, and it was one session either a week or one a month, I don't recall exactly. And you had a chance to let those 2 or 3 things he talked about soak in, practice them, come back the following week, ask questions about them, get a little review on them, and go on to the next. It's great if you have the opportunity to do that, and I ran some schools like that too. Terry, you're obviously
yeah. Well, 2 things I want to say. I belong to our local callers association. We do have some mini little lab things that we do. The second thing, when I went to Wade Driver's calling school, they provided me with a partial scholarship to attend that. So there's other revenues or other streams of funding to go to some of these caller schools. The second thing I want to say is just a little memory. The first caller clinic that I actually attended, Jon and Deborah Carroll-Jones did in Montgomery, Alabama. And I asked them, I wasn't calling, and I asked them if I could attend just because I was interested. And I sat there, and as Jon was going, when you do this, what can you do to get from here to here? And I'm going like, and I kept raising my hand. I thought, oh, I could be a caller.
Bingo.
So, Howard, we still haven't made space for Howard, and I can't raise him in the private chat. Howard, are you there? Apparently
just
not.
muted himself.
Yeah, Katie's been having her hand up for a while.
Howard just muted himself accidentally.
Oh, Howard's unmuted. Go ahead, Howard. Nope, he muted himself again.
He's still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. I'll try to make this kind of brief because callers tend to talk on and on. I went to my first caller school in 1980 to a name that I hadn't heard for a long time until today, Cal Golden. And it was a session, when I went there, I knew I had to have a little bit of patter and 2 singing calls. That was predestined. I was supposed to do that. I was fortunate that in our area, I had a caller that did mental image. and had started me on the mental image at that point before I went. And he'd been tutoring me. Also, as a comment, the schools only expose you. And when you go through the whole thing, I went for a whole week. I had tapes for every single session, of which, when it's being told you, it sounds reasonable. But as you keep getting this piled on top of you, pretty soon you're in mush. And you got to go home and start working on the things that you've got your notes on, your tapes on. You've got to listen. I started calling in 1980. I called till 95. I retired for 15 years, and then something hit me in the head, and I decided in 2010 I would like to start calling again. The only thing was there was no dances anywhere, and it's been tough for the last so many years. You need to call, but you need to go back and every day and every session that I've ever been with any callers, I've learned something. And we had a very strong Illinois state caller association. And we had, I think it was every other month, we had a session, a meeting, and a yearly where we had a caller coach or a seminar leader come in. So we had times with our local people to talk to, and then once a year we had the chance to have somebody come in and give us a specialization. But just basically my point is, you don't get out of the school if you think you're going to come out of that and be a national caller. It just doesn't happen. And that's what my comment was. And it's interesting, guys. I wish I'd been to some of the others.
Once again, Howard, most of them are online. Dan, you want to tell us how to find them?
Sorry, most of the caller schools? Or?
No, I'm saying most of these sessions. That's what
yeah, so the sessions are, how do you find them? They're a channel under my YouTube username, and if you go to youtube.com/danlight, you can see them uploaded there, and hopefully there aren't too many videos of my nephew and other wacky projects interspersed among them. But if you find the channel, and I will post the channel to Newbie Callers again after this, just to make sure that it's all there. And Tom mentioned that he has to go shortly, and I just wanted to thank Tom for being my first caller coach, and that was a completely overwhelming caller school for me. And yet I took over a club a year and a half later. So thanks, Tom.
You're welcome. Listen, before we go on, I truly do need to leave here shortly. I just want to take this time to thank Dan, thank Don. Thank you to all you newbie callers because of last week's discussion. That's why we're here this week. We've made you made us notice. We're listening. I think each of us have learned that we need to do better at what we do, regardless of years of experience of our calling and so forth. You know, the goal is that we want to make, we want to teach people how to call. And because of that, we have listened to what you have to say, and the point is taken, and we appreciate it. Listen, this doesn't fall on our lap. We have to work at it, regardless if it's John, who's been calling for a long time, and Betsy, that's been calling a long time, or somebody that's new. We always need to learn. This is an ongoing learning process for each and every one of us. And the more you learn, the better you get. Better you are. So I like to thank you guys for the opportunity of doing this. Maybe down the road we can do it again sometime, because I think it was a well-informed session. So thank you guys. Betsy, Deborah, John, Steve, Walt, Daryl, if I missed anybody, I appreciate you guys. My pleasure. Thanks. Steve, good to see you, buddy.
Hey, I'd like to, I'm going to be backing out as well. But thank you, Tom and Deborah, John, all of you folks, all of the caller coaches that are on here for sure. But two things I did want to say. Leo said something very important. Tom just reinforced it. Callers call. I don't care how much information you get out of that first school, take what you get and go to work with it. If you don't have a club, start one. If you don't have a mentor, these days, I think they're available on the media that you're sitting on right now. So do that. Tom said something earlier that he compared learning to call like going to the new dancers coming to their first beginner class. It's the same thing. You're going to learn a language. You go to learn the language of a square dance caller. Now, unfortunately, the language through the decades has changed. We've gone from the box 1-4 to the 0 box to the corner box to this and that. So a lot of the older callers, they're going to be speaking a slightly different language. We try to make those changes make sense, but even I've got questions about some of the names that we have now. But don't expect too much if you're ground zero. The program is put there to try to give you a basis to start, but there's no way, if you had a 2-week-long school, there's no way you're going to walk out of it a caller. My goal at a caller school has always been to try to get that new caller to the point they can call at least one tip. That means one pattern, one singing call, because we all start the same way. We start with guest tips. And you need to be able to get up there and do that one thing. But thank you, everybody. And it's always good to see you. Hopefully, it won't be too long before we see you again.
Dan and Don, I want to hear from Mel. He's been holding his hand up, wanting to talk. Mel Wilkerson.
Thanks, John. No, I was just reiterating, you mentioned the CALLERLAB curriculums, you mentioned the caller school curriculums. I agree wholeheartedly. I just flicked off when you were saying you were asking Dan about the recordings. I just flicked over to mine. I've got 73 of these sessions have been recorded so far, each covering, a 1-hour roughly presentation. Dan and I were talking about it before when we were talking with new callers, just learning some of these basics on modules. I did it, 7 sessions based on modules. Those 7 sessions, each with a 1-hour block, and about 2.5 to 6 hours of discussion afterwards, do not cover the amount of information that is presented in a CALLERLAB curriculum school on modules. I say that to emphasize the point of what Betsy was saying, and especially what Deborah very passionately said. You get the information, but what you have to do is take it to a venue, a forum, or take it home, rip it apart, pull it together, learn how to use it, and then as Daryl said, use it. This is one of the greatest forums that we have ever had for caller training, this Facebook forum, because we can take a caller school that is presented over the course of the week, and we can make 3 years of one-day presentations on each and every topic that's in that caller school and still not cover it all. So there is a lot of work away from the caller school. Yes, I understand it is a forced venue of massive information drop. I would like personally, however, to see CALLERLAB look at maybe not being so stringent with where they are putting their funding towards. There is a lot of really, really good caller coaches, a lot of really good caller schools, such as, a couple of them mentioned, Wade Drivers, some of the specialty schools to go to, that may only cover a small period, a small block of topics that are very worthwhile. And I see Steve sitting up there for the Australia Callers Federation as an example. We had a 4-day session scheduled for callers, which up in the Blue Mountains, that got unfortunately canceled. But that was 4 full days. And looking at the curriculum, we put the book together for that, which is, I think the final version was about 130 pages. That was the caller's reference manual that went to that. There was only 8 topics being presented at that 4-day school over the period of those days. That's definitely worthwhile and valuable. And we need to be a little bit more flexible rather than rigid in how we do things. Deborah said it, the onus of work and the onus of responsibility ultimately falls onto the person that decides to pick up the mic in the first place. That's it.
So, Mark, Betsy's got her hand up and Denise has not had a chance to talk.
Go ahead, Denise.
Okay, you sure you don't mind?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, I just want to give my input. I have been quiet over here listening and taking everything in. And a lot of good points have been brought up today that may help going forward, both for the newer callers getting involved and also for the calling coaches and caller schools. I received a little bit of mentoring before attending my first caller school, but I definitely was not a caller. I wasn't calling anywhere or anything like that. And I was very nervous. And that's one thing as a new caller, we're going to have to put in check our emotions when we attend these caller schools for the first time. Knowing or not knowing a singing call when we go for that first audition night, this is what the coaches are looking for. In my opinion, they're looking to see how much we know or don't know. And if we sit there and practice for 2 weeks ahead of time and show up and do a singing call and it comes out good, we may be placed into the wrong group. The caller schools that I've gone to, they separate people into different groups based on what your performance is on that opening night. But also I've heard people say that it's geared towards the same curriculum every time. Well, yeah, the base curriculum I think has to be the same each time because we always have newer callers coming in. But I have had, for sessions during the caller schools I've gone to, I've had mental imaging one year, I had crams, I've had showmanship seminars, music and the different types of music, square view, modules, resolutions, so many things. And we get this huge syllabus, which we can't even barely open while we're at the caller school. But when we get home, after we decompress for a little bit, we can go back and read through some of those things and use it even as a reference point. But I think it was Janet or maybe Katie, one of them said that they've read it from cover to cover several times, and there is a lot of good information in there. I guess that's pretty much, I mean, I've had good experiences. Did I know everything when I went in? Absolutely not. But what I think I took away from every one of those caller schools was a positive experience, whether I was embarrassed or I knew something or I didn't. And one other thing, and a lot of people know this about me, I am not afraid. If I don't know what a corner box is and they've been talking about it for 10 minutes, my hand is going up. I'm going to interrupt somehow and ask that question. So asking questions is really important. That's all I can say, and I'm off. Thank you.
I saw Betsy and John, so Betsy, go.
Okay, couple things. One is I was going to say the same thing Denise just said, and it was also in the chat. Don't hold back about asking if callers talk in terminology that you don't understand. If we can't communicate with you, then we aren't doing our job, but we don't know that unless you give us feedback. That's why it's a great thing to ask questions. And remember, you are the people that we are trying to please, believe it or not. We're not up there to show I'm a great caller coach. I passed a big test and oral exams and all that kind of stuff. We're there to help you learn to call because some of us have been around for a while and maybe we want to retire someday. And number two, one place that people can get experience that hasn't been mentioned. If you have a club in your area where there's a caller teaching, if they're amenable, there are always students who feel like they want more practice. If you can put together a square maybe in your house, and have them ask the questions that they're afraid to ask in class. And then you can go over the calls that they don't understand. It also gives you calling practice. It's a great place where you don't have to start your own club, but you can get experience, and you can benefit new dancers as you do that. So there's a benefit to both the new caller and the new dancer. If the club caller or teacher is amenable, then maybe they could mentor you and have you teach one figure per night in a class and give you feedback. If they're not amenable, then ask them if you can still work on your own where people need extra help, because it's going to benefit the club too, and the caller and the teacher caller. And I have to go, and I appreciate everybody's comments, and thank you for being here.
Hi, Betsy.
Bye.
Thanks again, Betsy, for joining us.
Yep.
So
I had a few comments. One that I've been noticing, and like Deborah mentioned and Leo, of going home and doing the work. One thing that I notice a lot of people, when they talk about doing their work at home, is this exaggeration from one extreme to the other of how much time they're actually taking to practice. You get the person that goes, oh, I just picked up this song and I'm singing it. And then you got the other one, I practiced it 3,000 times. And to someone who's trying to learn, those two exaggerations are, well, how much time do I really need to work? And I know that it's going to be different for everyone, but there's somewhere in the middle that goes, oh, okay, this is how much time I need to dedicate to this. And one thing that I noticed at some of the caller schools is that there is little to no communication between the coaches of preparation of what they're going to discuss, exactly what they're going to discuss, so that someone comes in and, oh, well, we're doing resolution, not knowing what resolution method the person before them taught. So you're all over the place, and they're thinking, well, he just taught resolution, so I'm just going to continue. But it's a totally different method. So there's no communication with what the plan is. You know, we talk about when we're teaching dancers to go in with a lesson plan, but a lot of these coaches are winging it.
Katie, are you talking about going to a school that has more than one coach and those coaches aren't communicating with each other?
Well, one, I think every school I've gone to has had multiple CALLERLAB accredited coaches. And some have had the accredited coaches and then those coaches that are working on towards their accreditation. So some have had 3, some have had probably 10, but they're just coming in and no plan. At one school, we had everybody, every time was different methods. Another school, I literally listened to the same exact presentation by the same person 2 days in a row.
Excellent points. Excellent points.
The lack of base communication between callers is not an unusual thing. I agree with you wholeheartedly, Katie. I've been to a couple of these places where a caller would be presenting, there'd be other callers or mentors in the group, and they'd say, oh, but you can also do this. Oh, but you can also do this. And in the guise of, yeah, this is another way of looking at it. It's great information, but can you hold that thought until I can digest the first bit of information I got first? And that willingness to impart information with a fire hose often turns off a lot of callers. And I think that kind of succinctly expresses what you're trying to get across there. It's all good information, but if it's too different from what was presented and what you're trying to learn in the first place, it just tends to confuse and overwhelm. Is that about right?
Could we possibly take a real quick survey among the newer callers as to if their experiences have been similar to Katie's? Denise, have you had this issue?
No, not really. I haven't had that happen where it's been the same thing, two callers in a row, two calling coaches in a row, and it's been the same. No, I haven't had that. But
how about you, Mark?
Go ahead.
Mark, wake up. How about you?
I was muted. I had to go run in and take care of my dad. What was the question?
Have you been to a caller school, and was there, what was the word used, Katie? Between
The same information.
Multiple coaches.
Right.
And giving each, not communicating with the other and repeating what the previous one said.
I'm sorry, Katie.
Yeah,
I couldn't hear you.
okay, let me clarify. At one school, I had different coaches that were constantly giving different information, having no clue what the other one presented.
Oh,
At
okay.
another school, I had the same presenter on 2 separate days, gave the exact same presentation down to the stories to relate it. It wasn't just like, oh, well, we're going to really dive into it. It was a repeat.
And
I have
Denise, it looks like
experienced
the
both of those same things that Katie has. I've experienced both situations.
Yeah, the first situation, now that she's clarified it, yes, that has happened where I've had a coach, the same caller school, I've had one coach come in and tell us that this is probably the better way to do something. And then the next breakout session, you have a different coach come in and it's, well, we're going to look at the same thing, but here's what the best way I think we should do it. Each coach is going to have, possibly a different way of presenting things. But yes, that has happened.
Ed?
The cases where you have a coach talking to the one breakout group, but then later on he's scheduled to do that presentation for the entire group. And instead of, and I don't necessarily find fault with the caller at that point, but that coach should have told the organizer, hey, the 8 people that were in my class the other day, maybe they could do something else instead of sitting through that same seminar, for the repeat session.
Katie, is that what you meant by communication between the coaches?
Yeah, there's just a lack, what I've experienced is a lack of communication between the coaches and a lack of planning as to what their actual presentation is going to be. I know some coaches, I've had Steve before, have handouts, know exactly where he's going with this presentation. And then others, it's like they were given a headline and then they're just flying by the seat of their pants with no lesson plan.
John, you've probably been around the longest, I think, on this. Have you seen this happen in schools you've attended? Not so much what you've done, but have you seen other callers other coaches kind of winging it?
No, I have not. I've done a lot of caller schools with a lot of different callers all over the world. And I have never seen that happen before. If it does, it's stupid. And they should communicate. They should know what they're going to do. But everyone that I have ever done, every caller had their assignments to do, and that's what they presented. And all of the other coaches were in the room at the same time. If they wanted to add to it, okay. But if not, they didn't repeat the same thing. Never.
Okay, let me point out what a problem is. If I said to you, John, you're going to teach resolution, what are you going to teach? You're going to teach, one way. What formula are you going to use?
We would teach pairing up people in 2-phase lines.
Okay, so now the next instructor comes in, doesn't know what you had been working on and decides that, no, we're not going to use that method. We're going to use another one. We're going to do friends and enemies. Now the students have to start over again trying to learn this. And they go through it for an hour and everybody gets a chance. Now the third teacher comes in and he decides to pull another one out. Well, you know, you did the first one. You think you were getting somewhere. You got ready to do it again, but that wasn't what the assignment was. Now you got the second one, and here comes the third one. And you have no idea. You've had only one time on the mic to try any one of the three. That's where we're talking the lack of communication of the one instructor leaving a note for the next instructor. I was working on two-face line resolution. Bob, Joe, and Sue are pretty good. Katie, Ed, and Frank need a walkthrough. Okay?
They need
To
help.
me, that's where the TA should be taking the notes to hand to the next instructor to say, oh, I see where my students are. Let me now continue. That's where we're talking that lack of communication.
Those are good comments, Ed, and it should be taken to note. I just have never experienced that in all of my coaching. And if we're going to teach resolution, we teach resolution at the same time, not at a different time. And then the individual caller must pick out which one they feel would be the easiest or the best for them to learn. And like I said, if you're doing 3 different resolution systems in an hour or an hour and a half, that's going to be difficult for any caller to absorb that has never done it before, especially a newer caller. But you have to take a little bit of piece of it at a time and make it fit to what you think is the best for you. But like I said, I have never experienced what you're talking about, that callers are not communicating and not programmed to do what they're supposed to do.
Well, I'll give you another example, and Steve can back me up on this one. Was at a school. They asked, so what do you want to work on at this school? Mentioned what I wanted to work on. Went through the entire school. And then they said, oh, this is what you're doing tonight. I said, well, that's nice, but we haven't even worked on that part of what I told you I wanted. So how could I possibly be prepared to do that? That's where you have a lack of understanding. And it's also difficult if the staff members are finding out on one night where, 25 people what they want to do, and now you're supposed to figure out by tomorrow morning where you're going to, how you're going to get to all 25 of those things. So we might need to, as I said, ask us some more questions when filling out the application.
I think what it might be is that John and Ed might be, and Katie are all talking about the same circumstance, but from different perspectives. Because if a caller coach that leaves that particular group of people to go on to something else can't possibly be 100% aware of what the next guy walking in does. My concern is, we talked earlier, some of the coaches are still here, but they talked about how it's a very fixed curriculum, but yet so many varieties about how people perceive these various classes, what they've learned, what they didn't like about them. Some don't do, what's the opposite? The thing at the end, not the syllabus, but the
evaluation.
The evaluation, thank you. A couple of the caller coaches here said, yeah, we do those. A couple of them said, oh, I think I'm going to start doing them. So just from my viewpoint, it just seems, and again, I'm not a caller coach. I teach caller clinics, but it just seems that there is a big lack of communication between the expectations of the students and the expectations of the presenters, and that's something that I think desperately needs to be worked on.
And I don't want to be rude in saying this, but John, the one thing to remember is, as the caller coach, the likelihood is that you are not in the classroom.
I don't understand. What do you mean?
I do.
Because you're in and you present. Then you go to another group and present. And the communication that that I'm speaking of is the idea that the presenter that goes to your first group, do they know what you did? And do you know the first presenter what they did to your second group? You're going from one to one, not knowing what the students are actually experiencing unless you're getting good feedback on your evaluations, which one thing I want to point out, and this comes from me as a teacher, is remember that your students are not always going to be honest on your evaluations.
Katie,
Why not?
If I can give you a
Why
hypothetical.
not? Because I need a job. I need a coach. I need you, which means I cannot offend you.
Yeah, but I paid my money. I want to get what I paid for.
Well, you take people like Dan Like and myself, we've just been pissing people off on a regular basis for years.
Well, there's always a nice way to
I
present
think Terry
it.
just about spit her coffee on that one.
Part and parcel of what's going on. And I think one of the examples that I saw in a couple of caller schools, one of which I was running, was I present, when I teach resolution, I present both the friends and enemies, which has been referred to as the two-faced line method, as well as a box method. I also have that printed out step by step on a handout and force all the callers to use it just to show it works so that we can put it away. That's the resolution. That is a technique that all of the callers that are presenting, or all of the coaches that are teaching, are going to use. That's the resolution technique, whatever it is we're going to present. That's what we talk about. But what has happened is when we get onto a different topic, for instance, we're going to be talking about isolated site, or we're going to talk about site resolution or something like that. Caller may come in and talk about how to use a focus movement in site. Does a great job, and then resolves the square differently. And a student will ask, well, how did you do that? Says, oh, well, this is just a resolution technique. I do this. If I'm in a right-hand lady box, I can do that. Bang, 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 bang. Quick explanation. And now unknowingly, you've created that confusion with a new caller because, wait a minute, you just taught us this friends and enemies two-faced line method, and you've given us this box method. I've got the handout, and you're doing something completely different. Oh, wait a minute, I'm trying to figure, oh, yeah, but now, Steve Turner's coming in, and he's going to be talking about asymmetrical resolving, which is something completely different, which may be on the curriculum or it's not an intentional thing. And what John was saying, when these schools are done, or at least on mine, when they're done, we talk to the callers. We try and get all the material they're presenting. If I'm going to work with Steve Turner, I'm going to get all of his material. I'm going to read his material. I'm going to present all of my material to him so he can read it, so that we're not cross-talking, and we'll correct and adjust accordingly. Things like that are going to happen. Unfortunately, this goes back to ask the question. And unless we know that we're doing this, we don't know we're creating that confusion. So Katie, if I was teaching, if Rick Hampton is teaching you something and I come in and I do the next session on a different topic, but I use something that contrasts with him, we callers and coaches have to teach new callers and coaches how to ask questions. Make that a class in itself, how to speak up, how to ask a question.
Well, I'll be honest, I have tried a lot of times, and you get talked over, you don't get answered. And the idea is, like for me, I have been dancing for forever, okay? I know that there are so many ways to do something, so many. I understand the concept that there's hundreds of ways to resolve. That does not allow me to learn any one way. I know that. And I think a lot of people, a lot of callers that have been calling a long time, they want to impart, I know. So every time you ask a question, instead of a simple answer, you get 10 more answers. So now I just have 30 more questions.
So, Katie, I want to say something about a little adage I use. It's sort of like a 12-step meeting. Take what you like and leave the rest. So you have to figure out whatever is in the material that's going to work for you. And part of that is your homework when you get back home, because some of the stuff you're just going to have to let stay on the cutting room floor.
Absolutely. I agree with that because it's true. I mean, there are times when things do conflict, but what I try to do is I take from it what works for me and put the rest somewhere, take a note, and maybe later on I'll address it. But yeah, that's true. I agree with you, Terry.
One of the things that I've noticed over the years, and it's the elephant in the room that no one is saying, callers compete with each other. My version is better than his version. My way of resolving is better than your way of resolving. And this blends down into whether it's a discussion in the bar at CallerLab or Nationals, or whether it's at 8 o'clock in the morning at a caller's school. There is some of that, quite a bit of that going on. I know a lot of these people, and I know, personal experience with them. I know that some of these people just won't be wrong. And that is just terribly unfair to the students. And, if we have this curriculum, then it should be addressed. Okay, we're going to do a 5-day-long caller school. We're going to teach a maximum of one way to resolve or 2 ways to resolve, period. Pick them out and be done with it. We're going to do a maximum of 1 way to convert lines to boxes, or 2 ways to, in other words, just come up with some plan so that they don't lose their minds going from session to session or instructor to instructor.
Oh, yeah. One of the things that I noticed is, we talked about friends and enemies, and I think this is roughly the mechanism I've learned as the profanity resolution. But in at least one of my caller schools, there was an in-facing line resolution, which involved seeing a whole bunch of things about the square formation before a pass-through wheel and deal, and in the way that it was taught. And so, yeah, I would love to see an emphasis in the curriculum development on how are people actually learning, because the other part about learning to call is that I have had so many callers teach me the one true way of doing something. And every caller who has their one true way has a different one true way. And the best teacher was Rich Reel, who is really good about, this isn't how I see it, but it seems to be how you see it. So try this method. And that's where we've developed the profanity-based resolution as our core of how we work with things when I do this, when I go to the Sunnyvale Caller School or Caller Workshop.
It really is. It's not hard for people to cooperate. I mean, my God, we're all in the same business. We all realize this thing has been declining tremendously. We're now in this 7-month-long out of business thing. And the last thing we need to be doing now is not cooperating. But yet, this 7 months would have been a great opportunity for the 29 caller coaches to get together and say, maybe we should just, kind of go through this curriculum and just make sure everything that's in there is still relevant. Same thing with, if you look on Facebook, many of us are in the social square dancing group, and many of us are also in the restarting square dancing group. And in my opinion, to restart square dancing, we're going to have to do a method such as social square dancing, because we're not going to be able to go 0 to plus those first 3, 4, 5, 6 classes. I think if we do it to the 0 to 50, we might just discover that there's something to it.
Terry, you almost gave me the idea that maybe we should run a session or write a book on, for very new callers or non-callers who want to be callers how to go to a caller school. Your thoughts on take what you can get and let the others be something maybe you should talk about later, but right now that's too much of the fire hose that we're doing.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, one of the things that we did a session for people wanting to learn how to challenge call. And so one of the things I've been doing is compiling the list of some of the things that as you move into that challenge level that tips that you might need to be aware of. And maybe we should develop one for newer callers about what it is you need to know about going to your first caller school, like this is going to happen or that's going to happen or that sort of thing, because you don't know until you get there.
Most of the schools that I've been on staff of or taught have not been super large number of callers. It's been either 1 or 2, maybe 3, but we don't break into sessions specifically so that the other callers, the callers that are not presenting, are in there also. So there's not much repeating as some of the people have suffered through.
It seemed to me, Don, that this book that you're describing or crib sheet, perhaps that would be a lovely project for, say, Dan and Katie and Ed and Mark and Phil to just kind of Facebook it together and just come up with a list of, this is what's going to hit you in the face when you go to caller school, and then give it to all the caller coaches before the caller school season starts, and that way they will know what these folks that they've been bringing in have experienced.
Well, yeah, and you could actually make it as an addendum to the new caller book that CallerLab has. This is a little addendum that can go with this to help you be prepared to go to your first caller school.
Is that the same CallerLab addendum that we verified we couldn't find on the website a few minutes ago?
I had no problems finding it, Rick. I got it the first time I went to caller school.
Well, Terry, good for you, because most people don't.
Yeah, and a question I asked in chat earlier is, why are we charging $25 for that? Because by the time you print it out and mail it, can't be a profit center for CallerLab. So why isn't it free? And I think one of the things that I would love to coordinate with the other newer callers on this forum and it's probably something that can't happen with more than 4 or 5 people, but to get a very simple, this is the one true way of resolving because all of you actually can see it, a very simple set of modules, and then get a couple of experienced callers to call that very simple set of modules and distribute that as an audio file so that people can play it over and over again in their car and chant to it to both memorize it and get the rhythm down. Because one of the hardest parts about calling for me was learning the delivery rhythm, and having something I could chant along to with that would be awesome.
Might be in my office.
I will say that the caller school that I was involved with Ken Ritucci, what happened was a couple of months before the school, they sent me the total list of all the callers that were attending. And I think, Katie can back me up, I think there's about 25, 26 callers at that caller school. We had 3 groups, and we had the history of every caller attending that school. So as a caller coach, I had some idea of the level of experience for every caller. We were then told what topics that we were going to present. So it wasn't us making the decision. It was really probably Ken and his team, because he knew a lot of the callers attending that caller school and their experience and whether they've attended previous schools that he's run. So all that was put together. So I can't understand why there was a double up with the same topic with different callers, because I don't think I had to repeat anything that I said. They were different topics with different groups, unless something just went off the rails at that caller school and somebody went somewhere else with it. I don't know. The one that Mel and I were going to run in Australia this year that was cancelled, we had 3 presenters with the same topic, but different groups of callers. And then we'd swap over to another group, but with a different topic. So we never actually repeated ourselves. So I'm sort of baffled there. The other comment that I'm hearing too, and I'm willing to take this on board too, is that caller coaches are not communicating with each other as far as running a school together. So I guess that's another issue that we've got to confront and probably try and rectify if that is happening. I know I made quite a few connections with the caller coaches I was working with because it was the first one I was doing overseas. I've been doing them for 50 years in Australia, so I really wanted to get a handle on how it was actually being run elsewhere out of Australia. So I just thought that was just the norm. And yeah, so obviously something went off the rails with some of the comments I'm hearing. And I'll take it on board and perhaps we'll do something as far as the caller coaches are concerned.
In your committee, Steve, is that something that you as an individual can bring up? I know in the SSD committee and the music producer committee and the advanced committee and a few other ones I'm on, if I come up with something, we just email, hey, we need to talk about this. The chairman then schedules a HO home office log, and then we get it going.
Sure.
Why don't you do that?
I'm sure we can. Yep.
Phil, you're muted, but unmute and talk.
I was just going to say goodbye. I need to leave, but this has been great. Thank you.
I have 2. 1:30 in the morning. I've got to go.
3:17 in the morning here.
You Australians are amazingly dedicated, but thanks for coming.
Enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
We're talking resolution techniques. I just posted it's a handout that I have laminated when I do caller schools. It's just a handout. It's laminated mainly because I like to get site resolution off the table early at a caller school because there's so much other stuff that's so important to learn. I use that, and then I'll put all the dancers in the most weird and obnoxious setups you can imagine and say, right, here's the sheet, follow the sheet step by step there, prove it, it works, you now know it works, let's put that away, and let's start learning on the things that are important to learn with calling. But somebody said it very succinctly here about taking what you can and throw it away. I have always been the strongest advocate of the very best resolution technique in the world that is 100% effective is the one that works best for you, regardless of what technique it is. It's the one that you choose, that you're comfortable with, that you master. That's the one you start with. You make that yours. Once that's yours and you know you got it, the stress is off you. You can slowly build, because once you have one that you know works, you know that no matter where the dancers are, you can resolve a square. Now you can worry about the stuff that's really important, and that's moving the dancers around, smooth dancing, letting them have fun, letting all that. Resolution, it came to me as one of the biggest shocks when I was doing a school here, I think 40 some odd students. And I said, what is the biggest stress on callers that are learning to call? And almost every hand went up and said resolution. I gave them this sheet, I walked through it. The second day, it was less than half the class. By the third day, resolution wasn't even on the table as far as a stress for callers. They didn't care about it anymore because a resolution technique is like a spare tire on the car. You're nervous if you don't have one, but if you have one and it works and you've checked it's inflated, it goes in a trunk and you never have to worry about it except for an emergency. That's what a resolution technique should be. Everything else should be planned out for you. That's
When
just my 2 cents.
I was learning, site calling really wasn't a thing. I'm sure it existed in some areas, but I started learning choreography from Jay King's book and from talking to Jay personally. And then I went to Jim Mayo's school, and he started teaching me some other method of choreography. And nobody ever explained to me that there were different types of choreographic management. And so I said to Jim, "Oh, I've been learning something else. Should I totally forget that and just listen to what you're saying?" And he very nicely, very wisely said, "No, there are different methods. You're learning one of them. Stick with that. I'm teaching you another one. That'll be another tool for your toolbox." Just like teaching resolutions, there's not one way, and hopefully your instructor does not say, "This is the only way because it's the way I like and I use." And as an experienced site caller, after a while, I'm not sure I used any of them. Or used a combination of all of them. It's, you grow into it.
Well, Don, Mel, my experience is that a lot of the instructors want it their way. So when you say, "Well, I've been working on this and this is what I'm comfortable with and I'd really like to practice this," so that, because a lot of us want that practice so that we really feel confident. We want to know that the spare tire's inflated. We want to know that. And instead of saying, "Okay, let's see where you're at, let's check it, okay, you're good, we can move on to putting another tool in the toolbox," or "No, we should work on getting that tool sufficient," they want to get some other tool, and I'm left with a dollar store hammer.
Yep. It's not uncommon. There's an acronym, and I'm doing this mainly for Rick if he's still here, but there is an acronym that is out there called EGO, which is one of the biggest things that most callers and caller teachers have a problem with, that acronym. Where that comes in is, I'll just say it as an example. When I was using that handout sheet for friends and enemies, I said, "This is how every caller here is going to resolve for the rest of the day. I don't care. Force yourself to use this technique only. It's the only one we're going to use." The only people that had trouble with it were experienced callers, because they're so set in their ways, it took them out of their comfort zone to go back and think like a student. There was so much information they wanted to impart. Taking it back a step was a bruise to the ego, that they couldn't remember that and impart that wisdom. We have to put ego aside. Rick said it very succinctly. Callers tend to compete with each other. That is the worst thing that we can ever do. I am more than willing to step back when there's something that needs to be done, or if there's a dance and it's in the best interest of the dancers, this is going on. This person's much better at doing this session than I'm doing. I'll step back and let him do it.
Hey, Mel.
That's what we don't have, is callers that, you have to have an ego to be a caller. You have to be an idiot to be a caller. You have to be able to be getting up there on stage and be willing to make a fool of yourself and everybody laugh at you to be a caller. And you have to have an ego. But more importantly, you have to know how to set that ego aside for the benefit of the dancers. And that's what we don't have, because a lot of callers have very good information, but they also have very, very big egos.
And Mel, I want to say 2 things. One, I really appreciate the fact that you and Don Beck and some of the other people that have been on these sessions really do strive to put the dancer first and take their ego out of it, because I think that's extremely important. You're right. You have to have some confidence and to be able to get up there and do all those things. But again, it's the dancers that need to win, and the newer callers need to win so the dancers can win.
Absolutely. I've been mentoring online now since 2016. I didn't realize it was so long since I was doing that, until I was having that conversation with Dan earlier in the session. And the one thing, I've never charged for any of this. It's always, what is it that you want? And the only bill that I put to new callers is, if ever you are in a position to pass information and help another new caller along the way, do it. That is the only thing I've ever asked from callers. Yeah, if I'm hired to do a school, however, I do hope to get paid, but the rest of it, that's what it's about. Share that knowledge. If you get a chance, just sit down and talk. I mean, I'd love to come and stay at your place, Don. You know, when you were running the bed and breakfast, I know you're not anymore, but hell, I would have booked that in for about 2 or 3 weeks just if I had the opportunity to pick your brains.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just put in 2.5 hours of the 1 hour I had set aside. And I think I'm going to bow out, but I will listen to the tape, Dan, so that I can hear what I'm missing later. It's been great as usual. And our goal here is to learn and to make you think. And it makes me think too, which is really good. I'm going to bow out, guys, but carry on if you want. See ya.
Thanks, Don. I'm going to leave the room open, and Rick and I are doing some Zoom tests at noon, so I will have either closed the room or passed off the meeting ownership to somebody else at that point. But I will post the recording as soon as I can do that after we quit.
Stay tuned for whatever excitement we come up with next week.
Yes.
Right.
See
Cool.
you guys.
Thank you.
I've got a session coming up in about what 5.5 hours as well. It's actually going to be almost a kind of lecture series. It's on the principles of smooth dancing.
Well, you better go get a nap.
Could be interesting. What was that?
I said you better go take a nap.
Oh, hell no. I haven't even been to bed yet since the day before yesterday.
It's been fun. I'm going to go too. I got to get.
Thank you, Terry.
All right. No, thank you guys. Y'all are doing a great job. I appreciate it. I'm glad I got up in time this morning.
Dan, I think you need to do about 6 more sessions to cover this, because it's not usually until afterwards that people start speaking up and you start getting into the meat of it, as Don says.
Yeah.
Just me, and just speaking informally here, am I the only one that felt that a few of the caller coaches were a bit on the defensive side right at the beginning until they relaxed into it?
I got that impression. And I think that there's, that there have been messages flying around in the background here too, as we've been going on. And I think that, I think that is an impression that other people hold as well.
Okay, just remember you are still recording.
Yes.
Unless you're going to edit this out.
Well, it's, I am both speaking very deliberately and trying to not expose anything else. And as Rick Hampton and I have been saying on the back channel, Rick and I see a lot of things very differently, but we are both kind of assholes out there in how we present as calling. So, it's part of my brand.
It's one thing, if you try to, like Katie and I were pointing out things that happen, but if those coaches who are on there, they're like, well, yeah, she's been at one of my schools. That guy, wait a minute. Yeah, now I know what he's talking about. Now it's like you're openly criticizing that coach. Now, how do you then go to the next place or seminar and get him or her to help you out?
Yeah, and that's an excellent comment, Ed. Where you have it is, I can't speak for all of the schools, but I'll speak for a couple that I know that were run in the States. What happens, or what has happened in the past, was you apply to the school, which the criteria of going to the school is basically being available and paying your money. That's really it. That says you can go to the caller school. But when you do that, there's also a couple of them that I've attended at. You fill out what is essentially a resume of your experience, your capabilities, plus a self-assessment of where you think you are. Because there's a lot of people, Dan, you're a good example of it. You say, well, I'm in that cusp between being a new caller and actually being a journeyman caller with experience. I think I find that the ones I've run, a lot of new callers know a hell of a lot more than they actually think they know. They just don't know how to understand what they do know and how to put it into proper application. And that's what my job is as a teacher and coach, is to say, hi, Katie, you're a brand new caller. What do you know? He said, well, I don't know nothing. Okay, well, do you know a singing call? Yes, I know a singing call. Well, let's look at that figure in the singing call. Oh, yeah, well, I know that this puts me to facing my corner. So you know how to get to a corner box. And we can break it down step by step and show you that you actually know a lot more than you think you know. And then how do you use each part of that independently and building those things up, so that if we get a decent resume, you're able to place these students, as you will, into a category where they can actually be with a group of peers at a relative same learning level. Steve Turner mentioned that when we were going to do the callers training sessions here in Australia, we had 3 callers in 3 groups. The same session was being given to each group, but it was being given for new callers, being given to journeyman callers, was being given to experienced callers. And the idea, the same with my sessions, are for a new caller, it's to get the foundation techniques. For a journeyman caller, it's how to improve on those techniques and the skills. And for a really experienced caller or a mentor, it's how to use all those experiences and techniques that you have to mentor new callers to bring into it. So it's that cycle of teaching, but it's the same topic. But the material that's given to all of them is exactly the same. The level of discussion and where it's taken is different.
Well, the one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of the schools tend to break down into the same type of groupings based upon almost your years of experience. However, I'll say patter versus singers is a very different skill set. And I've literally been in class with brand new caller who's a vocal teacher.
Yep.
I've had several voice people over the years, band members, you know, that are in the same class as someone who is so nervous to even try a singing call that they just avoid them.
Yep.
You know, and it's like, well, maybe we should look at some of the topics and break the groups down to work on that. I understand why the Caller Lab, we're saying that curriculum over the board, but once you get that initial, okay, this isn't my first day on a mic, but now I need to work on specific things, and what it takes one person to learn is not what it's going to take someone else.
Oh, absolutely. When I had the pleasure of going down to Ken Ratusi's calling school one year with Ken and Bill Harrison, Tony Oxendine, and Randy Page. And we went down there, and it really, really surprised me. One of the things that came out was right at the beginning, what you're saying is every caller gets up behind the mic and they do a quick presentation, do a part of a patter and part of a singer. If they're not comfortable doing patter, they say that, I'm not comfortable doing patter. You've already categorized them into what group they're going to be, where they need to actually work on specific skills. It doesn't mean they don't have the knowledge, they're just not comfortable with it. And that's something that needs to be worked on, is presentation skills. But when they presented, I was sitting there and I'm looking, okay, I've only been calling now, I think 11 years, 12 years. That was the first school that I went down to as a formal school. And I was looking at that and I said, right, I'm learning to call plus and learning to dance advanced, because I really had no interest in calling plus and advanced, but I needed to do all this kind of stuff. And the callers that got up and presented were phenomenal callers. When they called their pre-scripted patter, they did their singing call, it was almost all plus or advanced. And I'm going, wow, I'm out of my league with these guys. And then both Tony and Ken said, right, good job, everybody. Now, here's the rules for the caller school. From now on, there's nothing above the mainstream level. And every one of you is going to get up and you're going to do a patter and take the pennies off and call a patter. And it was the newer callers that were actually more able to call than it was the plus and advanced callers, unless they were experienced callers. That was a real eye-opener as to what is capability, what is presentation. I thought the same thing, what you were saying about oh, get up and do a singing call. Anybody can do a singing call, but actually learning how to call is difficult. When it came into it, and it wasn't until I went to a dance here in Australia, I ran into a lady caller who said, I asked her if she wanted to call, and she said, I can't. I can't do singing calls. I don't do I can only call patter. I've only learned how to do patter. And I went, wow. I mean, that was different, but they still got her up. Somebody else did the singing call. Her patter, I would put her at a level of where many callers are probably 15, 16 years of being a club caller, experienced basic mainstream plus. Her patter was that good, and it was not scripted patter. It was using modules, using sight, using technique, using resolution, using symmetry very effectively. And she said, oh, I'm not a good caller. I can't do a singing call, because she was afraid of her voice. My job is to get her past that and say, yes, you can. You know how to do this. And it's the same with you. And when callers present, they've got to get rid of that ego. They've got to get
the one thing I've noticed in the difference is doing that first night, and you say about the competition. Well, I don't want to get up there and look bad. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you the best thing I know in that short window.
Yep.
And you now have to figure out, based on what you've seen, what I don't know, and decide where I go.
I absolutely agree with you. And you know what you just said right there is what I ask for every student every time they get up behind the mic. I don't care if they've never called or if they've been calling for 30 years. Your best presentation should be what you give every time you get behind the mic, because that's the only way that I can judge you effectively.
No, but if I get up there,
I know what you're saying. I know, and I agree with you.
And I give you my preset pattern that I've memorized. I've run this thing through. I have it memorized, and boy, it looks good. The timing's well. Boy, he's pretty good. We're going to put him in this group. But what you don't realize necessarily is all the missing parts.
Yeah, and that's why I said that was the beauty of what Tony and Ken did. They said, right, good job, everybody. Now we're going to do it all again, and all your pre-scripted, all your thing, but it's mainstream. It's got to be a different pattern record. And suddenly they could judge everybody very effectively.
Yeah.
And that's why I said, I still want the best performance. And if the best performance you can give is not good, it's still better than somebody that gives a good performance that is a really good caller, but just gives, it's like that straight A student that doesn't study. It's not trying, but a C student that studies and works their ass off, I'd rather have that 100 times over, because they're working at what they're doing to get better. Hi, Denise. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And just in response to what Ed said, well, first of all, I think these accredited calling coaches are pretty good at picking in between the calls and the timing and everything. And they can see, they can tell probably that it was memorized just by you calling up there. But that being said, the caller schools I've gone to, they've always said on the first night, we're putting you into these groups, but if you feel after a little bit in these groups, it's above your head or below you, then let us know, and we have no problem switching you. So you have to be proactive and protect yourself, speak up, ask the questions that need to be asked, and if you feel you're in the wrong group, then you need to be changed. So you get something out of it, because we are paying our money for it.
Yeah. Well, I think for Jad and I, one of the biggest problems is that most of the schools don't do a lot on singing calls. And I know it was mentioned Wade Driver School. That is only for experienced. So that is people that can already do a singing call and are looking to get better at it. It's not for the person, like Belle mentioned, the woman that he came across, that I don't do singers. If you are so limited, and I know there are callers out there like ourselves, that the singer is the farthest thing from what we need to learn. And we're also told so many different things. Like, I understand the idea of being able to put in a different figure, being able to use a different opener, that with practice, with learning, with skill set, you can use that same song and present it 20 different ways. But as a newbie, as a right out of the gate, we need something that works.
Did
and
you
not,
take it? I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
It's okay. You can talk.
Okay. Were you able to take advantage of the Tom Miller one-on-one sessions for $10? Because that originated with singing call, help for singing calls.
That has been. I still
Yes.
have a hard time finding a time.
That's Denise. That's why the other day we were working on trying to set up my unit.
Okay.
A little personal note, Katie. Tell them what you got for your birthday.
I got the MA220.
Woohoo!
So we'll
And
be working
that's
on
what
hooking
you
that up
get.
to do. So I'll be in contact with you if I need some
I think it's
additional help.
Katie, I got
No
mine.
problem. I'm here to help.
Yeah. So, Dad, because Dave talked, did you say what you got for your birthday?
I said I got mine from my wife last year, and
Ooh.
that was the first time I switched over. I was still using a record player.
I got a new computer, which has preloaded music, all done nice and neatly, all in the alphabetical order. A lovely unit. Yep.
As to learning singing calls, Katie, I agree with you 100%. Understanding how a singing call works, how it's structured is very important. I do a lot of lessons on those as well. But it's so important to be able to learn how to do one singing call properly to start with. Once you learn that one singing call, then it's a matter of taking that one singing call and say, how do I develop that singing call into a full tip? There's a figure, I don't know, let's say you've got Rhythm of the Rain or something like that. So you've got a figure, head square through, do side do, swing through, boys run, bend a line, right and left through, flutter wheel, slide through, swing your corner. That's your figure. Now, when you take that figure is what you're going to use. One figure only. One opener. Same opener, same middle break, same closer. I always try and start a new caller with a singing call that has the same opener, middle break, and closer. There may be a key change or not. There's one figure only. And then learning how to use that material and how to actually perform that singing call. And I say perform that singing call. I'm not saying sing a singing call, because that's the worst thing you can do, despite what many callers will say. You need to call the calls, you need to sing the song, and how to make that a performance and a delivery performance. Once that's done, then we'll take that singing call aside and we'll use pattern, and we'll use that singing call as a pattern, and we'll develop those skills. Then we'll come back with the pattern call and the singing call, same singing call. And it may take about 3 or 4 weeks to get that one singing call down so that you actually understand how the music works, what the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and how to give that to the dancers, how to give the dancers the first beat, how to deal with that. Once you have one down, that becomes your focus, that becomes your basic point. And most callers will know their first good singing call, and they will always keep it, and they'll always go back, and they'll always do that sometime in their career. But once you have that, those are where you learn the techniques of building the other singing calls, picking another one with a different melody line, picking another one with a different tempo, a different rhythm section, and then using those same techniques to do exactly the same thing and develop those skills. It's not just vocal skills. One of the greatest persons on singing calls I knew was a fellow named Mike Turner. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure to meet them. That man could not carry a tune in a bucket. If you wrote it on paper, cast it in cement, put it in a bucket, and sealed it. Those are his words. He could not sing worth shit. But he was a phenomenal caller, a great entertainer, and people wanted to hear him do singing calls because even though he couldn't sing worth a damn, he always gave a great performance. Your singing is not the most important thing. You're making the dancers happy is the most important thing. Singing is only one tool in the toolbox.
Hey, you know, one of the things that's interesting to me is that nowadays a lot of people like to vary the figures, and they'll use multiple figures in the singing call. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, But when I first started dancing and calling, for that matter, we always it was always the one figure in the singing call, and then on a very, very rare occasion, maybe there would be a second figure that's repeated. But 90% of the time it'd just be, or 95% of the time it'd just be the one figure that and the guy would use that all 4 times. And somewhere along the way, everybody got the idea that you got to have all different figures in there. And I wonder sometimes how much the dancers like that versus the the good old repetition.
That is an excellent conversation, one that's been had a number of times. The advent of that used to come out, and I grew up in the same era where you did your patter, you did your singing call, you had the same figure in the singing call, because the singing call was the icing on the cake. It was what drew everything together, and what you had in your singing call tied to the patter. So if you had a feature movement like flutter wheel or spin the top, you knew there would be a flutter wheel or a spin the top as a caller in your singing call. That's what tied it all together. And the only time that there was varied figures, and usually a maximum of 2, and I will only do a maximum of 2 figures in the same call, is if it's just a general open night, it's a fun night, it's a lower level, as far as not level, but progressive dance, just have fun, warm up, high energy, that kind of stuff, there may be a second figure in a singing call. I personally don't like second figures because it just gives me too much shit to remember. But, go ahead.
I'm one that
Go ahead.
puts into, usually put into, but I don't know if that's good or bad. I haven't had any complaints, but again, sometimes the dancers won't complain about things like that. But I do make sure that I work both of them into my pattern material, and also with equivalents and stuff like that to mix it up so it's not just repetitive of the same thing in the pattern and then in the singing call, but they are in there at least once in my pattern, straight what they're going to be in the singing call as well. So I feel that that's my reward for working them up to those figures, is to put 2 of them in the singing call, but that's just me.
Yeah, I typically go with the 1 because, like you said, trying to remember, trying to learn. My issue is, for me, it's the phrasing. Like, I'm trying to be more rhythmic, whether it's singing, whether it's patter, but being with the song, and that's where I struggle. But the only time that I will flip with the figures in the singing is when I need to short time. Because sometimes I call and my dancers just aren't going to get there. So then it's like, okay, oh, we can't do that again, because
that's a whole different gamut. I'm actually going to be talking a little bit about that in my session at 9. But one of the things that Chris also said was where this came about. I've got nothing to back this up other than anecdotal information and evidence. So that's not worth a grain of salt. But this putting multiple figures into singing calls and changing them and sight calling singing calls, which is absolutely abhorrent in my book, because it's bad timing. You've got to be really good to do that. Is we rush dancers through the programs so fast to get them dancing material, so fast to get dancers into the plus groups so fast that we didn't teach them how to dance properly. That had a flow-on effect in that dancers at the higher levels were getting bored. They weren't. Callers were getting bored because callers were boring themselves, not the dancers. Rather than take a really, really phenomenal 50 movement program, which was the basic program, and learn how to use it and give a good, interesting dance, it was easier to give the mainstream program and then not teach everything in all ways used properly and effective. And then, oh, well, they're doing well, I'm going to give them plus because I can't think of how to do stuff half sashayed, or I can't think of how to do, or nobody's written a figure for this movement in a different formation.
But it seems like it came and it got a little better, and then it poured rain again.
Yeah. And what happened was, to get the dancers going, they would say, right, well, we'll give them variety by providing them with different figures. Every figure would be different. At challenge, that's great because that's what they expect. But dancers don't dance at challenge. They march to a position. That's fun for them. Okay, that's what they're there for. It's a wonderful mental experience. That's what it is. It's a different aspect of dancing. Doing a singing call at a challenge, like a C3 singing call, is unusual, and it's a novelty. But hey, it does happen. And when it does happen, some challenge dancers don't like it because, oh, it's a singing call. It doesn't have any challenge to it. So, you know, we've got the same figure 3 times or whatnot, or we've got the same opener figure closer. It's too well structured. Some love it. But what happened is those higher level dancers came down, callers were getting bored. Suddenly we've got 4 figures in a singing call, and worse, the figures were a mix of figures that would be repeated. You'd have these 4 figures, you'd have the same 4 figures in a different order in the next singing call. You'd have a 5th figure come in, but 3 of the old ones, and this is how variety was given, and none of them tied to the pattern. That was how callers were starting to give variety. I personally like variety.
I have seen that. I have seen that where I've danced it, where I danced the whole patter, somebody's patter, and then it's time for their singing call, and now they throw in a call that was not done in the patter at all and from a weird formation, and I barely can get this, and I'm thinking, yeah, I'm not going to do that. But you know, I see that a bit.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I was mentioning is not just doing different figures throughout the singing call, but when you're learning to call as a new caller, a lot of us are taught with a singer to use a different figure than what came with the cue sheet. And we're told, oh, well, some of the cue sheets are bad. You got to test it. But my thing is, think about it for the new caller, not the journeyman, not the experience. For the new caller, what you're actually saying, what you're asking them to do. You know, I would never think, oh, here's this song, you know, well, you could learn the way it was sang on the radio, or, oh, just come up with your own arrangement. You know, who would expect to do that?
I agree with all but one aspect of that. If you get a cue sheet that comes with the record, check it, make sure it works, make sure it times out right. That's a cardinal rule with anything. If I put choreography out there and you say, oh, well, Mel Wilkerson did that and he knows how to call, that choreography must be good. If you do that and you take my choreography and you get up on stage and you start calling it, you're an idiot, because I make mistakes. And always check. But that being said, I try not to, but I always will. You should always check your choreography. As to the rest of it, I agree with you 100%. We are trying to put our own personality on a caller. If I say, right, Katie, I'm going to mentor you now on a singing call. I'm going to give you the song "Oh Carol" by Smokey. I want you to do this song, and because it was originally, done from a woman's perspective, here it is, and it's got some really good lyrics. It's a really good song, and you got to really work this thing and take this, and you're going to look at me and go, what the hell are you talking about? 1, I don't know the song. 2, I can't fit the words to this song in, let alone the choreography. I will let you pick a song you're comfortable with, usually something that's got a good strong beat, a good strong melody line, and a moderate rhythm line that is in that area of about 124 to 126 beats per minute. And it will be repeated like that. And that will be the one that because you need to find your way through a song first. You need to find your way through the choreography first. You need to find your way through the metering of the song. Now, whether or not you can sing or not doesn't matter. It's a bonus if you can. But if you can present and you can understand how the singing call works, you can perform the singing call. And then you'll get into things like syncopation. Have you ever listened to Willie Nelson?
Not really.
Okay. I want you to somewhere go out and get a CD or a DVD of Willie Nelson's hits. And the reason I say that is I want you to just listen to the melody line that he has and then listen to his performance. He does not sing to the beat. He does not sing to the melody line of the song. He sings in counterpoint to the rhythm of the song, and he does an absolutely phenomenal job of it. I know a lot of callers that do that as well. And one of the reasons it's a great technique, because when you're performing a song, you're going to go da 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 now, and you get that first fling because that's the wow in the song. But if you do that as a caller, you're messing up, because that da is the dancer's first beat. That's what they want. You have to learn how to change that to give it to them. There's all sorts of things like that that need to be taught as a caller, rather than just listen to this and sing it. And there are a lot of records out there, and there's a lot of music out there that are sold as a performance because they sound absolutely fantastic. But if you listen to it, especially some of the older stuff, the caller is stealing that first beat from the dancer. The caller is selling the music and selling themselves singing that music, rather than selling the performance for the dancers. So always analyze that. Chris, you do a lot of calling. Have you got anything to add to that?
Well, I've got one thing to say. That is that the first two examples I gave last week of places where where what my caller coaches were teaching and what I was hearing were mismatched, was about singing call figures that came with the song that I purchased, and that that I did not have the understanding to, at that point, because I was a new caller, to know how to evaluate those and why they were difficult. I didn't have a way to drop in other ones because my timing wasn't developed enough yet. And when I had the conversations with the more experienced callers and dancers about this, they weren't seeing that connection either. So what you said about evaluating that, the timing and the flow of the singing call figure is actually a very advanced, very difficult process. And
It is.
Yeah, you can't really, I can't lay that on a new caller as something to do. But so if you are a new caller and would like a slightly less new caller to look at your singing call figure or record you another singing call figure that works in something, hit me up.
You are absolutely correct on that. Can I share my screen here, Dan?
Yeah, unfortunately, I missed last week's discussion, but I think that's the big thing, is what a coach or an instructor is expecting a new person to do sometimes is just way out of the realm of being new.
Absolutely. It is. I don't know if you can see my screen there. There's a song here called Heaven in My Woman's Eyes. Okay. And, it's the heaven in my woman's eyes. It makes the world a better place to be. And it has a grand square, opener, middle, break, and closer. It's exactly the same figure. 4 ladies chain over and back, promenade. And it's got this figure. Heads promenade and go halfway round the ring, and then down the middle. Do the right and left through, square through, and so on. Now, the reason I chose that is I'm going to go to Baroque Hoedown. I was going to do this. Now, here's my cue sheet, just a quick glance at a reference sheet for that singing call. Notice the figures on this singing call. Heads touch a quarter, girls run, pass through, circle to a line. That's a girl, boy, boy, girl. So inside couple, half sashade on the circle to a line. Touch a quarter, all 8 circulate, boys run, zoom, centers, pass through, circle to a line. It's a partner line. End step forward, swing your corner, and promenade. Oh, what are we going to do there? How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? How are you going to meet that into the figuring the song? I would never give something like this to a new caller. I would say, you've got the singing call that comes with the lyrics. If they work, great. If you're not comfortable with that lyric, do you have a singing call figure that you are comfortable with? Most callers will have 2 or 3 singing call go-to figures. if you ever get a chance to talk to Tony Oxendine, when they were producing on his record label, they had about 6 figures. Every single record had those 6 figures on it, one of those 6 figures. They did that because they were selling the music. They weren't selling the choreography. And that's why a lot of the sales declined after a while, because a lot of new callers were only buying the records so that they could find songs that I need to teach Vox the Nat. I need to find a singing call with Vox the Nat in it. That's not the way it was designed, but that was the reality of what was happening. When you look, I'm sorry, I'm pointing with my pen. When you look at all these are just pattern things that I would work in my pattern because I wanted to work circle to a line. This was my focus for this particular tip. That was my focus movement. I had that. It looks nothing. Sorry. It looks nothing like the music, except on my singing call, when I go to present this, I've got those 2 figures there, but that's the actual singing call that comes with the figure. If you were learning this as a new caller, that's what I would expect you to learn. Or if you had a different figure that you didn't like that one, that's what I would expect you to do. That's what I would expect to hear from you, because that's what you would practice. That's what you would do. You know, head 2 couple square through, 4 hands around that ring, and then you go there, swing through, and the boy don't run, you know, and so on and so forth down the line. I wouldn't expect you to change it. I wouldn't want you to change it, because to do that puts stress on you that you do not need as a new caller. You've got to learn to be comfortable with yourself, to be comfortable with the music, to be comfortable with your presentation. How I sing that and how you sing that are going to be completely different. And that's what I want to hear, is what you want to present.
Well, the one thing that I just want to point out, because I want experienced people to understand what it feels like when you don't know what you're doing. It's like, oh, well, just rewrite a figure, put a new figure in there.
Yeah, how?
Exactly. And the other thing is that I'm noticing what I dance to, what I see recorded, are mostly festivals, bigger dances.
Yep.
And therefore, those figures and the timing, where the lyrics fit in, don't work on the average dance floor.
Well, you can also look at that, and there are figures in square dance music that, when you look at it, they will fit that music absolutely perfectly. But unless you are very, very well practiced and very well versed in delivery timing, it's going to be awkward as hell for you to get that out. Just trying to think of, hang on, where is it? Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard this one or not. Willie Whalen and Me.
Nope.
Okay. This has music changes. It has rhythm changes. It starts out like a ballad. It's you know, that comes in, and then it goes into hard country music. If I play this, would you be able to hear the sound, Dan?
We can, surprisingly. Cool.
Just listen to this for a bit. And the eagles flew in from the west coast. Now, completely different.
Yes.
Now we've got a completely different rhythm line.
Okay, so I ask a question because this is where I start to get frustrated. I feel like I'm so new when it comes to dance. And so like you are so beyond where I'm at. What would be a song that you would say as a new caller, learn this one?
Not this one, Katie.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is I can dance, you know, the one thing I will say for me as a dancer, I've become what I call a festival dancer. I'll go to a festival, I'll go to a national convention. We don't have a lot of local dances. And by that, I mean, if I'm not calling, I got to drive over an hour. Okay. And that's the closest. It's 2 hours and plus to anything substantial.
So Katie's saying that she doesn't want to know about the ones that are too hard to do. She wants to be shown the ones that you think she might be able to work at.
Absolutely. But what I was going back to was the point of that song is one that I would never, ever give to a new caller. But the problem is a lot of new callers will go, and Dan was doing this initially in one of his sessions. He said that you hear all this phenomenal music going on and you go, oh, wow, that's a great piece of music. I want to do it. Oh, that's going to wow the dancers. And unfortunately, it's kind of like getting an 85-year-old man with his suspenders up to here and his trousers up to here, who's still a square dance caller and still good, but he's going to get up there and call a singing call to Miley Cyrus's Wrecking Ball. You know,
that one's hard. I bought it.
It just doesn't work because that performance doesn't match. The person could never do it, and then you would never sell that to an audience of dancers. When you give a performance as a caller, you're not just calling to the dancers. You're calling to the dancers to keep them happy, but you always need to make that performance to look at. If you had somebody walk in the hall and look at that square of dancers on the floor, would you be able to have them sit there and say, I enjoyed watching that. I might want to actually be part of that, because that's the performance, not just pleasing the dancers, but getting that communication between the dancers, the audience, and you as a caller, having that three-way, bringing the caller and the dancers into sync with the music, with the choreography, and bringing it all together to say, wow, that's something that I want to be part of.
Katie, I would suggest that you start with a song that you're familiar with from wherever. You know it already as a regular song. It'll get you part of the way there already because you know the melody of the song somewhat.
Yeah, well, one of the biggest problems I have with some of the square dance tunes that I go back to are the ones that I danced to for so long, so I do know them. But then you get to the figure, and the figure that's recorded is when we were dancing 132 beats a minute. And where the words fit in, where the phrases fit in, you know.
Well, that's where I was actually going next.
Okay.
Have you got a, like, what's a couple singing calls that you know?
City of New Orleans.
Perfect. Okay. Okay. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, let's hear it.
Do I get any music?
Nope, you don't need it. You know the singing call.
Well, and the way Zoom works is that the latency of what we heard from Mel's computer and you would be so different that, yeah, you got to do it a cappella.
Okay. Circle up. Riding on the city of New Orleans, Illinois Central, Monday monorails. Left Alaman that corner, those I don't now. Alaman left that corner, weave the rain. Good morning, America, how are you? Swing that lady round and promenade. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. I'll be long gone before the day is done. Now they had two couples square through, four hands around their reek. Find that corner lady, those I don't now. Swing through Kabuchi by two, boys run to the right you do. Bend that line and then ride a lift through. Flutter wheel, go full around and slide through. Swing that corner, lady promenade. I'm the train they call the city of New Orleans. I'll be long gone before the day is done.
Do the figure again, please. This time, but I want you to drop the filler words.
See, I'm hesitant to do that in the fact that that's what I'm struggling with.
I know.
Okay.
I'm intentionally doing this to you. There's a reason.
Okay.
So head to
Double square through four hands. Do side do. Swing through. Boys run right. Bend that line. Right and left through. Flutter wheel. Slide through. Swing that corner, lady promenade.
Beautiful. That's what I was looking for, because what I found, and it is hard on a cappella because you're trying to find that actual is the rhythm. I'm going to show you something here. Can you see those?
No. Oh.
Hang on. Let me.
You have the background.
Background thing.
Yeah.
Whatever here. Stop share. Where's background? Virtual background, none. Is there a way to go none? None.
So I'm going to, I hate to do this, but I think Katie will actually appreciate it. I'm going to stop recording now and duck off.
You.
And I've got another thing, so I'm going to set up Mel as the host. I've got to get ready because I'm going to coordinate with Rick Hampton on doing some stuff in a moment. So.
No worries.